everyone, Novels Wonderland here. Thank you all for the love and support you've shown me and the channel.
And anime multiverse, starting by teaming up with Maple, the Shield Girl. Chapter 286 to 302, Chapter 285, 5 viral headlines blowing up the internet? Chapter 285, 5 viral headlines blowing up the internet? Rumble. In an instant, the entire planet was erased by Seto's divine power. It didn't break into asteroids, rather, it was ground into cosmic dust, vanishing completely from the galaxy. The godhead of sound shot out from the wreckage and flew straight into Seto's hand. Divinity, God of Sound. Description, can be bestowed upon one who has opened the path to godhood. Grants the user the title of music god and the corresponding divine authority. Kanade Tachibana's godhead had been secured. Seto tucked the divinity away with satisfaction and activated Kamui to release Yunshinga. That scared the life out of me. Yunshinga exhaled a massive breath, clutching his chest as his heart hammered against his ribs. If Seto hadn't pulled him into the spatial dimension just in time, Qingxi would have, well, broken him. Interestingly, Yunshinga wasn't even upset that Seto's attack nearly vaporized him. He was only worried about his purity being taken by Qingxi. To him, a man's dignity was far more important than a minor brush with death. Thank you, big bro. Yunshinga called Seto big bro with total sincerity this time. The man had literally saved his soul. You'll be moving with Sora for the next phase, Seto said, gesturing toward Sora. You got it. Yunshinga didn't hesitate for a second. Seeing his cooperation, Seto laid out the mission: Sora, take Yunshinga and track down a pseudo-god holding the blacksmith divinity. I've sent the coordinates to your panel. Roger that. Sora nodded. With the team split, Seto took Shiro and Akeo to hunt for the remaining godheads, while Sora and Yunshinga headed off to secure the crafting materials for their legendary smith. Sometime later. It was now 6 a.m. in the Eterm country. Seto and the others regrouped, sitting cross-legged on a silent, dead star within the domain of the gods. Seto looked down at the 6 godheads and shards in his hands: sound, words of power, life, blizzard, ocean, and a blacksmith shard. He began to finalize the distribution. Among the Fatui harbingers, only Kotori Minami, Kanade Tachibana, and Lisbeth were still missing their divine cores. This haul completed the set. Kanade Tachibana, Sound Divinity. Chairwoman Minami, Words of Power, Kotodama, Divinity. Lisbeth, Blacksmith Shard. Among these, the Words of Power divinity was arguably the most precious, but Seto had no regrets giving it to Kotori. Her innate talent was already perfectly aligned with linguistic authority. As for the others, Shoko, Life Divinity, as previously decided. Yuki Snow, Snow Queen Blizzard Shard. Hai Lan, Mermaid Queen Ocean Shard. Seto, have you decided who gets what? Sora asked. Yeah, Seto replied, explaining the list. Everyone nodded in agreement. It was the most efficient way to maximize their faction's strength. Alright, let's wrap things up for today. We have that match against Tet tomorrow night. Got it, Sora said. He, Shiro, and Akeo didn't really need sleep anymore, so they headed to the 30th floor to prepare the Fatui Empire's legions for the upcoming planetary contest. I'm heading offline, Seto said. It was morning in the real world, and he still had school. Back in his living room, Seto found Kurukuru Amu and Kanade Tachibana having breakfast. Kanade, your godhead is ready. Tonight, I'll take you out to hunt some minor gods and push your level to 100, Seto said as he walked in. Mu? Kanade swallowed her spicy tofu bun in one go, her large eyes sparkling with light. She jumped up and skipped over to Seto, looking up at him with expectant, adorable eyes. Be good. I can't give it to you just yet, wait until after school, Seto said, giving her a gentle head pat. Since it was a full godhead and not a shard, she needed the level requirement first. Okay, Kanade nodded obediently. Seto joined them at the table. There sure is a lot of news today. Amu remarked, scrolling through her phone. Oh? Like what? Amu put her phone down and took a bite of a bun. 5 major headlines. The announcement of Sora and Ako ascending to godhood. The clearing of the 60th floor and the start of the War of the Gods. Total chaos in foreign countries due to the manifestation of monsters and powers in reality. The sheepdogs, those pro-foreign influencers who used to stir trouble in the Edirm country, have fled abroad to start their own factions. And finally, the Edirm country is officially adding supernatural studies to the national curriculum. Sito took a bite of his breakfast as he processed the info. The first 2 were expected. The third was inevitable. Foreign players had been suppressed by the Edirm country for so long in-game that they lacked the strength to maintain order when the game world bled into reality. But the fourth one made him want to laugh. Those experts and influencers who spent years praising foreign powers while bashing their own country had finally gone to live with their masters, only to try and take over. It was a legendary move. With their in-game levels, they could likely gather followers easily in the chaotic West. Just then, Sito's phone rang. Sasageo. Sasageo. Shinzu wa Sasageo. Thank you for reading. Chapter 287, Chapter 286, The Expansion of Supernatural Classes, Heading to Class B. 1,328 words. Chapter 286, The Expansion of Supernatural Classes, Heading to Class B. Whose number is this? Staring at the unfamiliar number lighting up his screen, Sito felt a flicker of doubt. He slid the screen to answer. Moshi Moshi, is this Sito? Chairwoman Manamai's voice echoed from the other end of the line. Yes, it's me. Sito nodded to himself, a hint of curiosity surfacing. What could Chairwoman Minami possibly want with him this early? Sito, there's an urgent staff meeting this morning. Make sure to head straight to the conference room during morning homeroom, she instructed. Understood. With a brief response, Sito hung up. A meeting? The implication was glaringly obvious. This morning's gathering was undoubtedly tied to the 5th major breaking news headline. Now that the world had officially entered the supernatural era, integrating supernatural studies into the school curriculum needed to happen as soon as possible. Sounds like it's about the supernatural classes, Karukiruamu remarked. Even though Sito hadn't placed the call on speaker, both she and Tachibana Kanade had easily overheard the conversation. Yeah. Sito nodded in agreement. Let's finish breakfast first. With that, he took another bite of his steamed bun. Beside him, Karukiruamu and Tachibana Kanade continued eating their breakfast with practiced elegance. A short while later, having finished their meal, the trio stepped out of the house. Just as they crossed the threshold, Sito's gaze drifted toward the Yukino-shita residence next door. He walked over and lightly rapped on the door. Knock, knock, knock. Haruno? Yukino? Are you girls in there? Coming, coming. Pitter-patter. The lively voice of Yukino-shita Haruno echoed from inside, followed by a flurry of quick footsteps before the door swung open. Click. My. Haruno stood there, her signature playful smile firmly in place. Sito-chan, what brings you to my door so early? You're tagging along with me to grind levels tonight. We need to get you ascended to godhood as quickly as possible, Sito stated bluntly. No problem at all. Haruno chirped, flashing him a cheerful okay sign. Step, step. At that moment, Yukino-shita Yukino stepped up from behind her sister. Let's go, we don't want to be late for school, Yukino said, falling into step beside Sito. Right. Sito nodded. The group bid Haruno goodbye and set off toward the academy. 7:30 a.m., Sobu High, first floor conference room. By now, the school leadership, along with all the homeroom and assistant homeroom teachers, had already gathered inside the room. Sito sat next to Kurisu Mafuyu, flipping through a small notebook as he casually observed Chairwoman Minami and the school board members seated at the front. Alright, what exactly is your problem? Turning his head slightly, Sito frowned at Yamaguchi Daifuku, who was currently staring a hole into the side of his face. Ever since Sito had walked through the door, Yamaguchi's eyes hadn't left him for a second. The man's expression had shifted drastically from sheer shock to profound confusion, and finally to existential dread. Clearly, seeing Sito, who was supposed to be a student, now sitting comfortably among the faculty members was causing the man to thoroughly question reality. "Nothing, it's nothing," Yamaguchi mumbled, quickly averting his gaze. Ignoring him, Sito turned his attention back to the school board. Chairwoman Minami tapped the microphone a few times to test the audio, clearing her throat to organize her thoughts. "Teachers, I am sure you have all seen the news by now. The government is mandating the addition of supernatural classes across all schools to further integrate our nation into the supernatural era. As the premier high school in Chiba, Sobu High must take the lead in implementing this initiative. Supernatural classes will now be a daily requirement. Regarding the teaching staff, we will be implementing a temporary strategy." Taking a sip of her tea, Chairwoman Minami continued, "For the time being, a unified nationwide directive states that homeroom teachers will manage these classes. If a homeroom teacher's supernatural level is insufficient, the assistant homeroom teacher will take over. We will wait for further directives from upper management regarding specific adjustments. If the ministry authorizes new hires, the academy will naturally begin recruiting specialized instructors." Hearing this, Sito nodded in silent agreement. Currently, individuals possessing significant supernatural power were desperately needed by the military and the government bureaus. Since schools were merely places of foundational learning, having teachers with a basic grasp of the fundamentals handle the introductory material was the most logical step. Once the pool of powerful supernatural individuals expanded in the future, the school could gradually transition to hiring dedicated professionals. Following her briefing, the other board members took turns speaking, though most of it was just standard, redundant bureaucratic fluff. Half an hour later, the meeting finally adjourned, and the teachers filed out of the room. Walking down the corridor, Karisu Mafuyu turned to Sito. "Teacher Sito, regarding the supernatural curriculum for our class, I believe it would be best if you took the lead." Although Mafuyu had also utilized a divinity orb to fully manifest her hidden strength, her power still paled in comparison to Sito's. "Consider it done," Sito replied smoothly. He glanced down at the updated schedule he had received upon leaving the conference room. Class E wasn't scheduled for their supernatural class until the final period of the morning. However, looking at the roster for Class B, their very first period of the day was history. "I have an upcoming period to teach. I need to head over to Class B," Sito noted. "Understood. Have a good class," Mafuyu nodded gently. The two walked up to the third floor before parting ways. As Sito made his way toward Class B, Hoshinomiya Chie caught up to him, a playful, sly grin on her face. "My, if it isn't Teacher Sito heading to Class 2? Chie cooed, her tone laced with a distinct, teasing lilt. "Is there something you need?" Sito asked, giving her a slightly wary look. In the original anime, this woman was notoriously manipulative and scheming. Even though she was supposed to be Chabashira Sai's close friend, she never missed an opportunity to undermine her. Fortunately, this particular universe lacked the ruthless advanced nurturing high school meritocratic system. Otherwise, a wild card like Hoshinomiya Chie would undoubtedly be plotting behind the scenes every single day. "Oh, nothing at all," Chie smiled breezily. "I just happen to have a class with Class A right now, so I thought we could walk together." Sito gave a noncommittal nod. The pair quickly arrived outside Class B. With a cheerful wave, Chie continued down the hall toward Class A. Sito took a moment to adjust his collar, schooling his features into a stern, authoritative expression before stepping through the door of Class B inside Class B. The moment Sito walked into the classroom, the entire room fell into an awkward, bewildered silence. Countless eyes locked onto him. They had heard rumors yesterday that Sito had somehow been appointed as a faculty member of the academy, but seeing him actually walk up to the podium as their instructor made the reality sink in. Sito swept his gaze across the room. Aside from Imamura Kohei, who was looking as utterly clueless as ever, most of the faces staring back at him were prominent figures from the classroom of the elite universe. Clearing his throat, Sito addressed the class. I believe introductions are unnecessary, as you all know exactly who I am. I expect absolute focus during my lectures. There will be zero tolerance for slacking off or daydreaming. His words instantly sent a wave of tension through the students of Class B. Sito's expression was deadpan and severe. He clearly wasn't playing around. Satisfied with the sudden drop in room temperature, Sito pulled out his phone and casually took a seat behind the teacher's desk. Excellent. Sakayanaji Arisu, come up here and take charge. This period is now self-study. Thank you for reading. Chapter 288, Chapter 287, A Visit to Arari's House? 1,386 words. Chapter 287, A Visit to Arari's House? The entire class stared back at him in sheer bewilderment. 1 second, he was delivering a stern, deadpan speech about academic discipline. The very next second, he casually threw the entire lesson out the window and declared it a self-study period. Could this guy be any more reckless? Muttering inwardly, the students reluctantly pulled out their textbooks and began putting on a show of studying. Meanwhile, Sakayanaji Arisu tapped her cane against the floor as she made her way up to the podium. Is there something wrong, Teacher Sito? Arisu asked, a knowing smile playing on her lips. Sito glanced down at her legs, and without a word, reached out and scooped the petite girl directly into his arms. The sudden gesture caught Arisu completely off guard, causing a faint blush to instantly dust her cheeks. Didn't you manifest your power already? You couldn't use it to heal your legs? Sito had been curious about this from the start. Arisu had clearly manifested her hidden abilities, yet she still seemed to struggle with her mobility. It can't be healed, Arisu replied, shaking her head slightly. Her constitution had always been frail, and her legs were a long-standing physical limitation. While the manifestation of her abilities had brought her physical stats up to normal parameters, the deep-seated injury to her legs remained unresolved. Unless, of course, she managed to fully manifest her absolute maximum power from the divine realm. Let me help you. Sito extended his hand and gently placed it on Arisu's thigh. A soft, soothing white light began to radiate from his palm. Feeling the sudden warmth enveloping her leg, Arisu dazed for a brief moment. This feels so strange. It was incredibly warm and comforting. And yet, the realization that Sito was directly touching her thigh made her face flush bright red, a wave of profound shyness washing over her. After a few moments, Sito finished the treatment, withdrawing his right hand with a smile. Give it a try now. Okay. Quickly snapping out of her daze, Arisu carefully placed both feet flat on the ground and stood up. Feeling the newfound strength and stability surging through her legs, a brilliant, genuine smile broke across her face. Thank you very much, Sito-kun. Arisu expressed her gratitude warmly. Don't mention it. Sito offered the small girl a gentle pat on the head. Alright, head back to your seat. Arisu nodded happily and quickly walked back to her desk. With his task done, Sito pulled out his phone, leaned back, and casually started watching a movie. Time flew by in a blur. In the blink of an eye, the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day. Sito was currently leaning against the wall outside Class C, waiting for the Nakano quintuplets to pack up, when he felt a gentle tug on his blazer from behind. He turned around to find Arari standing there, her face completely flushed as she looked up at him. Is something the matter? Sito asked, curious. Say. Sito. My mother wanted to invite you over for dinner. She wants to thank you properly for what happened the night before last. Arari had actually intended to extend the invitation yesterday. But for some inexplicable reason, the moment she caught sight of Sito yesterday, the words got caught in her throat. Coming to find him today had taken every ounce of courage she could muster. Your mother wants to see me? Sito mulled it over for a second before replying, sure. I'll tag along with you in a bit. Missing a single tutoring session with the Nakano quintuplets wouldn't be an issue today. After all, the standard first-year curriculum was no longer a challenge for them. Securing his agreement, a small, involuntary smile tugged at the corners of Erori's lips. Just then, Nakano Ichika stepped out of the classroom. Ichika, I won't be coming over for tutoring today. I have to head over to Erori's house for a bit, Sito explained the moment he saw her. Oh, you're not coming today? Ichika blinked in surprise, a brief flicker of disappointment crossing her features before she nodded understandingly. All right, I understand. Though her heart felt a little empty at the thought of him not being around, she knew she couldn't hold him back if he had other obligations. I'll make it up to you tomorrow, Sito said, giving her head a playful pat. MMH. Ichika smiled softly. With that settled, Sito and Erori took their leave. 5 minutes later, the two exited the Sobu High gates and began walking down the street toward Erori's family villa. Along the way, the quintessential tsundere refused to take the initiative to strike up a conversation, keeping her mouth firmly shut. Sito, amused, remained quiet as well. After a few minutes of walking through the bustling streets, Sito finally turned his head to look down at her. You know, Erori, what's with that look on your face? You look like you desperately want to say something but are too embarrassed to open your mouth, Sito teased, his tone dripping with amusement. Humph. Erori's face flared red instantly. She snapped crossly, I can look however I want. It's none of your business. Yep, still the exact same flavor, Sito chuckled inwardly before tossing out another question. By the way, have you been drawing any new doujinshi lately? You. Erori practically leapt into the air, frantically clapping her hands over Sito's mouth. She whipped her head left and right, checking their surroundings. Only when she was absolutely certain that none of the nearby pedestrians had noticed did she let out a massive sigh of relief. Can you lower your voice? Erori hissed under her breath. Blatantly bringing up something like that on a crowded public street was a one-way ticket to social suicide. Lower my voice? Sito stroked his chin thoughtfully, as if an intriguing thought had just occurred to him. Speaking of which, you've clearly never experienced that kind of stuff in real life. How on earth do you manage to draw those doujinshi with such vivid, intricate detail? Erori. The moment the words left his mouth, Erori's face turned completely crimson. How was she even supposed to answer a question like that? Was she supposed to just admit that it was all purely fueled by her wild imagination? Humph. Pervert. With a classic, tsundere huff, she turned her head away completely, ignoring him for the rest of the walk. Seeing her reaction, Sito chuckled and decided to drop the subject. The pair arrived at the Spencer residence shortly after. Erori pulled out her keys, unlocked the front door, and stepped inside. Mom. I brought Sito over. Oh? Is he here already? The elegant figure of Sawamura Sayuri appeared at the top of the second-floor landing. Looking up at her, Sito couldn't help but nod in silent approval. As expected of an anime mother. It was no wonder certain historical figures had such a renowned preference for married women. Sawamura Sayuri possessed a breathtakingly slender and curvaceous figure. Her exposed arms were smooth and porcelain pale, complemented by long, elegantly sculpted legs. Coupled with her flawless, radiant complexion, Sito felt a sudden, distinct surge of his inner Weiwu heritage. Hello, Mrs. Sawamura, Sito greeted politely. Sito-kun, you've finally arrived. Sayuri offered him a warm, gentle smile. Why don't you head up to Erori's room and hang out for a bit? I'm still in the middle of stewing the meat. Sure thing, Sito replied. The moment Sayuri turned back toward the kitchen, Sito turned to Erori. Let's go. Lead the way to your room. Okay, Erori nodded instinctively. But a split second later, the implication of his words registered, and her head snapped back as she shook it violently. No way, she yelled, her voice echoing loudly through the hallway. Sito's expression turned deeply amused. It was just sitting in her room for a little while, did she really need to have such an explosive reaction? Unless. As a sudden realization struck him, Sito grinned widely. Well, I think I'll go take a peek first. Before she could even process his words, Sito activated his spatial teleportation and vanished from the spot. Thank you for reading. Chapter 289, Chapter 288, Re. 1252 words. Chapter 288, Re-entering the God Domain, the Leveling Plan. Ah! Seeing Sito suddenly vanish into thin air, Arori let out a sharp shriek and immediately dashed toward her bedroom. After all, her room was practically a treasure trove of her daily artwork. If certain illustrations were discovered by him, she would suffer absolute, irreversible social death. Meanwhile, inside Arori's room. The moment Sito materialized, his expression gradually turned bizarre. His gaze had locked onto Arori's bed. Spread across the sheets were several freshly drawn manuscript pages. If his eyes weren't deceiving him, the two characters depicted in the rather intimate drawings looked suspiciously like himself and Hideyoshi. Taking a couple of steps forward, Sito picked up the pages to get a closer look. A few moments later. Sito. Placing the drawings back onto the bed, Sito began to profoundly question his life choices. Arori's creative imagination was truly something else, and incredibly cursed. Good grief. With a flick of his wrist, Sito activated his skill, swirling the manuscripts into the void of his Kamui dimension. Whoosh! Igniting a burst of flame within the isolated pocket dimension, he completely incinerated the questionable artwork, ensuring not a single trace remained. Bang! Right on cue, the door burst open, and Arori lunged into the room, her face completely flushed. You. Did you see those drawings? Taking in the state of the room, Arori would have to be an absolute fool not to realize what had just happened. Yeah. Me and Hideyoshi. Seriously, you. Sito's mouth twitched slightly. He had a massive urge to relentlessly roast her, but considering the evidence had already been thoroughly vaporized, he decided to let it slide. Hearing his muted response, Arori let out a massive sigh of relief. Thank goodness. At the very least, the most incriminating drawings hadn't been seen by Sito. She had secretly exercised a bit of caution, keeping her truly top-secret stash locked away elsewhere, which was why Sito hadn't stumbled upon them. Humph. It's none of your business anyway. With a classic, defensive huff, Arori marched over and plopped herself down on the edge of the bed. Sigh. Sito let out a helpless chuckle. I'm going to dive into the God Domain for a bit to handle some business. I'll be back shortly. There were still loose ends to tie up within the game world, so Sito planned to make a quick trip. Fine by me, Arori grumbled, offering no objections. Nodding, Sito initiated a full dive, shifting his consciousness back into the God Domain. The God Domain, Realm of the Gods. Sito materialized back onto the barren surface of the dead star within the Realm of the Gods. Crossing his legs, he sat down and pulled up the Fatui Harbinger's chat channel. Noticing that all the Harbingers happened to be online, he quickly dropped a message. Sito, everyone, assemble in the Realm of the Gods. Coordinates.jpg. After sending the location pin, he switched over to a private message with Nishimiya Shuko. Sito, Shuko, tag along with the Harbingers and come over to the Realm of the Gods. Coordinates.jpg. With the messages delivered, he closed the interface and waited quietly. A short while later. Whoosh. Whoosh, whoosh. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. One by one, the 11 Harbingers alongside Nishimiya Shuko descended upon the desolate planet. Catching sight of Sito waiting ahead, they touched down around his position. Among them, those who hadn't yet ascended to godhood lacked the raw speed to traverse the cosmic terrain, so they had been carried along by the ascended members like Kurukuru Amu. Sweeping his gaze over the assembled group, Sito looked toward Sora. Sora, how are the preparations with the Empire coming along? Smoothly, Sora replied after a brief thought. The mobilization orders for the upcoming campaign had already been distributed. Currently, the entire Snezhnaya Empire was locked and loaded in a state of absolute wartime readiness. Good, Sito nodded in approval. When the time came, he could easily relocate the entire Imperial Army using his Divine Kingdom's spatial transport capabilities. Turning his attention back to those who had yet to break through to godhood, Sito asked directly, "Are you all willing to become my subordinate gods?" This was a matter he needed to clear up firsthand. After all, he couldn't just assume everyone's personal ambitions. "I do. I do." Maple was the first to raise her hand enthusiastically. Right beside her, Tachibana Kanade raised her hand as well. Though she remained silent, her stance was completely clear. "I don't have any objections either." Since Maple agreed, "I'm down," Sally added with a soft smile. She honestly didn't mind either way, even without a formal contract, she would always stand by Sito, so formalizing it as a subordinate god was an easy choice. The others chimed in one after another. "Hiratsuka Shizuka, no objections here." "Yukino Shida Haruno, hehe, since Sito-chan is the one asking, of course I'm in." "Nishimiya Shuko, I feel the same." Ultimately, only Liz and Chairwoman Minami remained silent. Scanning the room, Chairwoman Minami finally voiced her concern. "I don't mind the arrangement, but given my specific innate talents, finding a matching divinity core might prove to be quite difficult." Her primary concern was her specialized path. The absolute best fit for her would be a Kodadama, Word Soul, divinity core, which was notoriously rare and difficult to come by. "Don't worry, I've already taken care of the divinity core issue," Sito replied with a reassuring smile, signaling that she could rest easy. Hearing this, Kodori smiled and let go of her reservations. Finally, all eyes turned to Liz. "Hey, don't look at me like that, what could I possibly object to?" Liz chuckled, giving a playful shrug. With a unanimous agreement from the entire group, a bright smile spread across Sito's face. "Excellent. Our top priority right now is to power level everyone. We're going to hunt down a minor deity. The sheer amount of experience points from slaying a god will instantly blast all of you straight to level 100. Sito smiled as he outlined the strategy. There was one detail that had actually surprised him recently. After clearing the 60th floor and unlocking the realm of the gods, the level cap of the god domain hadn't increased. From this, it was evident that level 100 was the absolute hard cap for both players and NPCs alike. Whether there lay anything beyond that remained to be seen. But on second thought, it made perfect sense. Once a being achieved godhood, their core attributes were entirely integrated into their divinity core. If people could still endlessly level up after that, it would be fundamentally unfair to the deities who had ascended early. Hearing Sito's plan, the group harbored no doubts. "Which deity are you planning to target?" Sora inquired, looking at him. "A certain blade god," Sito answered smoothly. He had selected this particular target quite a while ago. Once they secured the blade god's divinity core, it would serve as the perfect match for Chabashira Sae. "A blade god, huh?" Karukiruama's lips curled into a fierce, eager grin. "How's their strength?" "Judging by the residual aura, they should be around the early stage of the minor deity rank." "Why? Are you interested?" Seeing her expression, Sito easily deduced that the battle-hungry girl was itching for a fight. "You bet," Karukiruamu nodded sharply, her eyes flashing with anticipation. "I think I'll go test his mettle myself." Thank you for reading. Chapter 290, Chapter 289, The Goddess of War, Karukiruamu vs Ashuk the Blade God. 1290 words. Chapter 289, The Goddess of War, Karukiruamu vs Ashuk the Blade God. The Blade God. The title alone made it crystal clear, this was a deity who lived by the blade, a being who possessed the coveted blade divinity core. For someone like Karukiruamu, this was exactly the kind of powerhouse she desperately wanted to challenge. "Let's head over together," Sito said with a calm smile. It was a good opportunity to let Karukiru test her limits. After all, in the upcoming divine war against Tet, she, as the newly minted goddess of war, was slated to go toe-to-toe with the god of combat itself. Hearing this, the rest of the group grew eager with anticipation. Sito immediately extended team invites to everyone who hadn't reached level 100 yet. As for why he joined the party himself? It was purely a safety measure to ensure he could step in if things took an unexpected turn. With all the preparations complete, Cedo led the group as they vanished from the planet's surface. A short while later, on a specific planet nestled deep within the god domain, a male deity holding a divine longsword suddenly snapped his eyes open, as if sensing an encroaching presence. He stared up at the sky, his brow furrowing deeply. "Are they here to seek trouble with me?" "How utterly foolish," the male deity scoffed. He stomped his right foot against the ground and soared straight into the cosmos. In an instant, he breached the planet's atmosphere. Ahead of him stood a handful of deities leading a crowd of mere mortals right into his territory. Among the opposing deities, a statuesque goddess stepped forward. Ashuk. Divinity, Blade Divinity Core. Level, Minor Deity Rank, Early Stage. "Amu, go ahead and test his mettle," Cedo remarked, withdrawing his gaze after reviewing the panel data. Now that he had confirmed the opponent's precise level, he had no intention of intervening. Amu could handle this entirely on her own. "Consider it done." Amu let out a wild, arrogant laugh as her divine energy erupted. Boom! The sheer force of her divine pressure burst forth like a raging tsunami, surging violently across the void. Her presence began to skyrocket at an alarming rate. That sacred yet bloodthirsty battle intent caused Ashuk's brow to knit tightly together. This aura. The War Divinity Core? A god of war? Sensing the core authority behind her power, Ashuk drew his divine longsword without hesitation. A god of war was never an opponent to be taken lightly. These deities were born and bred for the slaughter. If he didn't give this fight everything he had, he might very well capsize in these treacherous waters. Boom! Ashuk unleashed his own divine energy. Unlike Amu's chaotic aura, his energy carried a sharp, piercing intent, an unyielding momentum that felt as though it could cleave through anything in its path. He truly deserved the title of Blade God. His presence perfectly mirrored the essence of his divinity core. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Cedo summoned his dimensional cube, casting a protective barrier that completely enveloped the group behind him. "This Blade God actually has a pretty decent aura," Yukino Shida Haruno remarked, looking on with immense interest. "It's merely decent," Hiratsuka Shizuka replied, pulling out a cigarette and lighting it. "I have absolute confidence in Amu's raw strength." Though Shizuka hadn't interacted much with Amu back in high school, she had spent a considerable amount of time running dungeons with her in the game recently. By now, she knew full well that Amu was an absolute battle maniac. When it came to clearing monsters, the girl fought with a frantic, savage joy. It really felt as though she existed solely for the battlefield. Whoosh! In a flash, Amu lunged forward. Wearing a wild, sinister grin, she closed the distance instantly, closing her hands into tight fists right in front of Ashuk. Black flames flared across her knuckles as a pair of divine artifacts manifested over her hands. Cedo and the others could clearly see that they were a pair of pitch-black gauntlets. The artifacts were etched with veins of crimson light, radiating a distinctly eerie and unsettling divine pressure. "Come on!" She threw a ferocious punch. Opposite her, Ashuk reacted instantly, raising his divine blade to deflect the incoming strike. Boom! Fist collided with blade, sending a shockwave that rippled out for tens of thousands of miles across the void. Seeing that her opponent had successfully blocked the opening blow, Amu's laughter grew louder. Not bad at all. Let's keep this going." Boom! Boom, boom. Under the relentless onslaught of Amu's fists, Ashuk was forced to continuously swing his blade to defend himself. He gritted his teeth, a profound sense of frustration welling up inside him. Her combat transitions were incredibly fluid and seamless. She truly embodied the martial prowess of a god of war, refusing to grant him even a single breath of respite. Rumble. Under the continuous aftershocks of their devastating clash, countless floating meteors were reduced to fine space dust. Down on the surface of the planet Ashuk ruled, his loyal followers lifted their heads toward the sky one after another. They could feel the ground beneath their feet violently trembling as the atmospheric distortions above became increasingly terrifying. Is this a battle between gods? Do deities fight among themselves? Of course they do. It must be an invading god attacking our Lord. This newcomer is definitely an evil deity. Damn it. Hold the line, Lord Ashuk. The inhabitants of the planet cried out in anger. None of them wanted their homeland to fall into the hands of an invading conqueror. Meanwhile, having been completely suppressed and driven into a defensive corner by Karukiru-Amu, Ashuk knew he couldn't afford to let this momentum continue. Blade God Strike, third style. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Funneling his divine energy into his weapon, Ashuk unleashed 3 consecutive, blinding arcs of sword light. Boom. Caught slightly off guard by the sudden burst of speed, Karukiru-Amu took the brunt of the attack. Seeing her get hit, the spectators couldn't help but feel a surge of anxiety. Sito-kun, is Amu going to be alright? Sally asked anxiously. While they couldn't fully read the trajectory of the clash from their position, Sito, as a peak-tier deity, could undoubtedly see everything clearly. She's perfectly fine, Sito replied with a reassuring smile. Hearing his words, everyone breathed a sigh of relief and turned their attention back to the battlefield. Sure enough, as the dust and smoke cleared from the void, Karukiru-Amu stood suspended in space, completely unscathed. Whoosh! Taking advantage of the brief separation, Ashuk hastily retreated a significant distance. He gripped his longsword tightly, dropping into a heavy offensive stance. Now that attack actually had some bite to it, Karukiru-Amu said, tilting her head to crack her neck as she loosened up her muscles. Heh, to receive praise from a goddess of war is truly an honor, Ashuk chuckled coldly. His gaze drifted past her, landing briefly on Sito and the group standing behind him. However, I don't recall ever offending any of you. You haven't offended anyone, Sito spoke up, his voice carrying a calm, detached serenity across the void. But the divine war has officially commenced. This is a war of all deities. In this conflict, there is no right or wrong. There is only survival, and absolute annihilation. Ashuk froze for a fraction of a second upon hearing those words. The divine war? He hurriedly interfaced with the God Domain System logs, checking the current server-wide announcements regarding the state of the realm. A moment later, his entire expression shattered into pure, unadulterated shock. Thank you for reading. Chapter 291, Chapter 290, How Evil Deities Are Born, Backing and Backgrounds. 1,330 words. Chapter 290, How Evil Deities Are Born, Backing and Backgrounds. Ashuk found it hard to believe. He had never expected the divine war to trigger this early. Seeing the sheer disbelief etched on his face, Sito's eyes flashed with a sharp, calculating gleam. Do you happen to know something? Sito surmised that this divine war wasn't as straightforward as the literal name implied. Otherwise, a literal deity wouldn't be showing this kind of reaction. Hearing Sito's voice, Karukiru-Amu held off on launching her next attack, stepping back to wait for the Blade God's answer. I do know a thing or two, Ashuk replied grimly. Though it is called the Divine War, it would be more accurate to call it a trial that separates true gods from evil deities. In this conflict, the victorious deities will ascend as true gods, gaining the authority to enter the higher echelons above the god domain. As for the losers, they are branded as evil deities and permanently banished from the universe. He didn't particularly mind sharing this information with Sito and his group. After all, it was a piece of lore that anyone could easily unearth just by asking around among other deities. Hearing this, Sito and his companions exchanged meaningful glances. So that's how evil deities are born? No wonder the journal entry back on the 51st floor had expressed such profound shock regarding the true identity of an evil deity. At their core, evil deities were still gods, they were simply the discarded pool of candidates who had been slapped with the loser's label. However, the revelation that the Divine War was a contest to secure the title of a true god and gain passage to the upper realms thoroughly piqued Sito's interest. It looks like I'll have to fully commit to this Divine War after all, Sito murmured, stroking his chin with a smile. There was no way he was going to pass up an opportunity to climb to a higher realm. While Sito was lost in thought, Ashok narrowed his eyes and spoke up, his voice taking on a warning tone. I advise you all to tread lightly. I belong to the Divine King Star region, serving directly under the weapon Divine King. I suggest you carefully weigh the consequences of executing me. Hearing this, the expressions of Sito and his crew turned thoroughly amused. Well, damn. Talk about a cliché. They actually stumbled upon a deity with powerful backing? However, a divine king, huh? Sito tapped his chin in contemplation. He wasn't entirely sure if a divine king could bypass world boundaries to descend into the god domain and slaughter them. But logically speaking, a powerhouse of that caliber wouldn't be able to cross over so casually. Even if the enemy utilized some sort of high-tier, specialized artifact, it shouldn't pose an existential threat. At worst, they could always report the breach to the God Domain system logs. As long as the Divine King couldn't wipe them out in a single, instantaneous strike, it wouldn't be an issue. Sito already had a solid contingency plan in mind. He would have Karukiruama beat the Blade God within an inch of his life, and then he would step in to deliver the final blow himself. That way, even if the weapon Divine King possessed a tracking mechanism to register who killed his subordinate, Sito could easily use his Kamui dimension to completely evade any retaliatory strikes or tracking curses. The only potential headache would be dealing with the fallout once they eventually advanced into the Divine King Star region themselves. But that was a problem for future Sito. For now, he had plenty of room to farm and grow within the God domain. By the time he actually set foot in the Divine King Star region, who was to say he wouldn't be a Divine King himself? With that thought, Sito brought up his personal status panel. Name, Sito. Divine title, Spatial God. Level, Peak Tier Deity. Divinity, Spatial Divinity Core. Innate talent, Spatial Mastery. Divine energy required for advancement, 3,280,000/10 million. Skills, Velocity Space, Exclusive, Spatial Movement, Exclusive, Spatial Void Step, Exclusive, Spatial Dragon's Roar, Exclusive, Spatial Dragon's Breath, Exclusive, Dimensional Slash, Exclusive, Kamui Dimension, Exclusive, Spatial Storm, Exclusive, Blessing of the Swift Wind, Exclusive, Spatial Perception, Exclusive, Life Heal. Equipment, Spatial God Set, Divine Tier. Ever since he had hunted down a few deities earlier that morning, his divine energy reserves had climbed to over 3 million. At this rate, it wouldn't take long at all before he successfully broke through to the Divine King realm. This farming efficiency is absolutely beautiful, Sito grinned broadly. The moment he ascended to a Divine King, the level caps for all his subordinate gods, including Karukiruamu, would automatically scale up with him. Thus, he felt zero intimidation toward Ashok's threats. Lifting his eyes to look at the battle-ready goddess, Sito offered a confident smile. Amu, don't kill him. Just beat him until he's completely crippled. Got it. Hearing the sheer confidence in Sito's voice, Karukiruamu smiled fiercely. With a surge of divine light, she manifested a long spear in her grip. This was her second offensive divine artifact, one she rarely brought out in combat. After all, compared to standard weaponry, she vastly preferred the raw, visceral satisfaction of driving her bare fists into an enemy's flesh. But that didn't mean she lacked mastery over the spear. Whoosh! Closing the distance with blinding speed once more, Karukiruamu launched a fierce offensive against Ashok. Her strikes were exponentially more violent and chaotic than before, instantly overwhelming the Blade God's defenses. Damn it! Ashok's heart hammered against his ribs in sheer panic. He had already thrown down his ultimate trump card, yet Sito and his crew didn't display a single shred of hesitation. This was entirely outside his calculations. Could it be, do they have an equally terrifying backing? Is there a rival Divine King standing behind them? Ashok felt utterly slighted by fate, his mind spiraling into dark frustration. Under Karukiruamu's relentless spear techniques, his ability to deflect her blows rapidly deteriorated. Incorporating the spear allowed her to weave complex, unpredictable attack patterns. The moment he successfully parried the tip of her spear, a heavy fist would crash into his ribs. When he shifted his focus to block her fist, the spear would lunge forward to pierce his flank. The desperate scramble left him completely battered. His divine form shattered in multiple places, golden divine blood spraying across the vacuum of space like water from a broken main. "Looks like this match is effectively over," Sora chuckled, a relaxed smirk on his face. Karukiruamu truly proved herself to be one of the strongest harbingers alongside himself, Shiro, and Maple. Her raw, instinctual combat experience was simply unparalleled. "Yeah," Sito nodded in agreement. Turning back to the party, he suggested, "How about the rest of you retreat into my Kamui dimension or the Divine Kingdom for now?" "Eh? Everything is going so well, though. Why do we need to hide inside the Divine Kingdom?" Maple asked blankly, blinking her large eyes in confusion. Ako, Nishimiya Shuko, and Liz looked equally bewildered. Sally let out a helpless breath, stepping forward to explain the potential threat of the weapon Divine King tracking them and the strategic precautions Sito was taking. Hearing her breakdown, Maple and the others finally experienced a moment of clarity. "So that's what he's planning. Sito-kun, we'll head into the Kamui dimension then. We know for sure we can still leech experience points while party sharing inside the Kamui dimension, but we aren't sure if the party system stretches across the Divine Kingdom," Maple answered reasonably. As long as they remained inside the Kamui dimension while maintaining an active party status, the game mechanics would still allow them to absorb the massive experience bounty from the upcoming kill. Alright, sounds like a plan. Thank you for reading. Chapter 292, Chapter 291, Slaying the Blade God, the entire party ascends to godhood. 1,300 words. Chapter 291, Slaying the Blade God, the entire party ascends to godhood. Activating his Kamui dimension, Sito drew the rest of the party into the swirling vortex, safely out of harm's way. Turning his gaze back toward the battlefield, he floated calmly toward Karukiruamu. By now, Amu had beaten Ashuk into a bloody pulp, leaving him in a thoroughly wretched state. His divine physical form was completely skewered on the tip of her long spear. "Amu, head into the Kamui dimension for a second too," Sito said, coming to a halt right beside her. "Got it," Karukiruamu grunted. She wasn't stupid, she knew full well that delivering the final blow herself wouldn't do her any practical good. Sito activated his skill once more, pulling her into the isolated space. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The dimensional cube materialized around Sito, hovering lazily as a dense aura of violet cosmic energy crackled along its edges. Cough. Cough. Ashuk coughed up vast quantities of golden divine blood, glaring death at Sito. "The weapon Divine King will absolutely avenge my death. We'll worry about him when he actually gets here," Sito replied coolly. Boom. The moment the words left his mouth, the dimensional cube discharged a blinding pillar of violet light, instantly obliterating Ashuk into space dust. Meanwhile, inside the weapon Divine King star region of the God domain, deep within a swirling cosmic nebula, a powerful entity radiating an intensely dense divine light suddenly snapped his eyes open. Ashuk is dead? The weapon Divine King's brow furrowed tightly. He swept his right hand across the space in front of him, summoning a localized scrying mirror that replayed the exact moment of the Blade God's demise. This is... Staring at Sito's figure in the playback, the weapon Divine King found himself thoroughly perplexed. There was a distinct fluctuation of high-tier spatial authority, and the stranger's raw presence was undeniably formidable. At the very least, he was a peak-tier deity. Yet, the Divine King searched his memory and realized he had never seen this person before. That made no sense, he had met practically every peak-tier deity residing within the God domain. Unable to pinpoint the intruder's origin, the weapon Divine King decided to exercise caution. To act this flagrantly meant the boy undoubtedly had someone powerful backing him. It was just a matter of figuring out which rival Divine King was pulling the strings. For the time being, he chose to maintain a watchful, calculated silence. back with Sito. Following Ashok's demise, a flawless divinity core radiating sharp, pulsing arcs of sword light floated out from the remains and drifted directly into Sito's outstretched palm. System announcement: your spatial set bonus has been triggered. You have gained 470,000 divine energy points. System announcement: as the first player to solo slay the deity Blade God, Ashok, you have been awarded the solo first kill bounty, Blade Divinity Core. Blade Divinity Core can be bestowed upon an individual who has already unlocked the path to ascension. Grants the user the title and sovereign authority of the Blade God. Perfect. Now Sae Sensei's Divinity Core is secured too. Sito smiled broadly, carefully storing the artifact away. Since Chabashira Sae wasn't present at the moment, he obviously couldn't give it to her just yet. He planned to bring her out here later to power level her through her own ascension. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Opening the rift to his Kamui dimension, Sito released the Fatui Harbingers and Nishimiya Shuko back into real space. The moment they stepped onto the desolate terrain, their eyes locked onto the residual energy where Ashok had fallen. My level is finally maxed out, Hiratsuka Shizuka murmured, staring at the glorious level 100 blinking on her status panel. Sito-kun. Let's start the ascension process right now. Maple chirped excitedly, her eyes shining. The rest of the group who had yet to break through to godhood turned to look at Sito with identical expressions of pure anticipation. Right, Sito nodded. He raised his hand and extracted a concentrated mass of his own divine blood. Chairwoman Minami, Shuko, Kanade, you three take 1 drop of pure divine blood each. Everyone else, take 10 drops. As he spoke, he retrieved the respective divinity cores and fragments, passing them out across the group. Except for the 3 he had explicitly named, the others were utilizing standard divinity core fragments, which required a significantly larger catalyst of pure divine blood to stabilize the ascension. Nodding in unison, the group accepted the artifacts and immediately began absorbing the divine blood. Boom. Boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. A series of earth-shattering shockwaves erupted from the site as multiple divine ascensions triggered simultaneously. The sheer scale of the phenomenon was so immense that it instantly caught the attention of several neighboring deities residing across the cosmos. Powerful entities at the late and peak stages of the minor deity rank locked onto the massive energy signature, training their celestial senses towards Sito's coordinates. Fascinating. Are these newly ascended deities? I don't recognize any of their signatures. Hee, an entire group breaking through to godhood all at once? I wonder if they are chess pieces planted by those divine kings over in the star region. I doubt it. My guess is they transitioned up from the mortal realms below. No divine king would waste that much resources helping a massive group of ordinary mortals ascend for no apparent reason. From the lower floors? But didn't the newest generation of adventurers just barely enter the god domain? Who knows? The watching deities conversed back and forth through divine telepathy. However, their intrusive surveillance was glaringly obvious under Sito's hypertuned perception. A cold, amused smile tugged at the corners of Sito's lips as he turned his gaze toward the endless expanse of the starry sky. Everyone, hiding in the shadows to peek into other people's business isn't exactly a good habit. Boom. The moment the words left his mouth, Sito unleashed the full, unbridled pressure of his divine presence. The terrifying spiritual pressure of a peak-tier deity rippled across the sector, causing every single spying deity to instantly sever their connections and snap their gazes away. What a joke. Nobody in their right mind would needlessly provoke a peak-tier powerhouse when they could easily mind their own business. Besides, now that the divine war had officially commenced, everyone needed to focus on gathering as many subordinates as possible rather than picking fights with top-tier wildcards. Seeing the foreign presences hastily retreat, Sito smoothly reined his aura back in. Is something wrong? Karukiruamu floated over, her hand still resting casually on her hip. Sora, Shiro, and Akeo followed close behind. Just a few minor deities trying to peek at what we're doing. It's nothing to worry about, Sito replied, waving it off dismissively. As a peak-tier deity himself, he had absolutely zero reasons to feel intimidated by a handful of looky-loos. The group turned back to stand guard, watching over Maple and the others as they finalized their ascensions. Half an hour later. System announcement: players Maple, Sally, have successfully absorbed your divine blood and have officially become subordinate gods under the spatial god. System announcement: you have unlocked the subordinate god status panel. System announcement: current subordinate god count, 5. Subordinate, goddess of the earth Maple, minor deity rank early stage. System announcement: current subordinate god count, 6. Subordinate, goddess of shadow Sally, minor deity rank early stage. System announcement: current subordinate god count, 7. Subordinate, goddess of music Conade, minor deity rank early stage. A relentless barrage of system notifications chimed inside Cito's mind. But before he could even begin to sort through the updated roster, a booming, server-wide announcement echoed clearly across every corner of the realm. Thank you for reading. Chapter 293, Chapter 292, Divine Pantheon Strengthened. Inviting the Queens? 1,387 words. Chapter 292, Divine Pantheon Strengthened. Inviting the Queens? Server-wide announcement. Congratulations to player Maple for successfully ascending to godhood. Player Maple has attained the divine title, Goddess of the Earth. Let us all offer our blessings and faith to the Goddess of the Earth. Server-wide announcement. Congratulations to player Sally for successfully ascending to godhood. Player Sally has attained the divine title, Goddess of Shadows. Let us all offer our blessings and faith to the Goddess of Shadows. Server-wide announcement. Congratulations to player Conade for successfully ascending to godhood. Player Conade has attained the divine title, Goddess of Music. Let us all offer our blessings and faith to the Goddess of Music. A continuous barrage of server-wide announcements chimed across the realm. The moment these notifications echoed, players throughout the entire game froze in absolute disbelief. Every single one of the Fatui Harbingers had officially become a deity? Even an executive-level member had ascended. The executive the system referred to was none other than Nishimiya Shuko. Holy crap! The entire core roster just achieved godhood. Damn. This is insane. Every single Harbinger is a literal god now. With this, the absolute supremacy of the Fatui and the Snezhnaya Empire is completely unshakable. Good grief, these system alerts nearly gave me a heart attack. This is just way too overpowered. If only one or two players had broken through to godhood simultaneously, the player base wouldn't have been quite so flabbergasted. But a collective, simultaneous ascension of the entire Fatui leadership? That was an unprecedented, historic spectacle. The players' community channels remained in a state of utter frenzy, unable to calm down. Meanwhile, several prominent corporate syndicates and family clans within the eastern country could only let out helpless sighs. They had long since tried to dig up background intelligence on Cito and his inner circle. However, they discovered that any player holding a rank of guild executive or higher within the Fatui had their profile data completely encrypted by the system. Cito and the Harbingers were locked behind SSS-grade encryption, while regular executives sat at S-grade. Unless Cito or the others chose to willingly expose their real-world identities, it was fundamentally impossible for anyone in the eastern country to trace them. It was just like Mayor Kira back then. As the mayor of Chiba City, he had only ever heard whispers about the top-ranked player of the god domain within the Transcendental Legion. He had no clue regarding Cito's true identity. If Cito hadn't voluntarily chosen to disclose it to him back then, he would have remained in the dark for the rest of his life. Back with Cito and his group. Looking at the ladies before him who had all successfully crossed the threshold into godhood, Cito wore a deeply satisfied smile. With this, the structural backbone of his divine forces was fully established. Whoosh! With a subtle distortion of space, Cito vanished from real space and materialized inside his own divine kingdom. Standing suspended in midair, he looked down upon the expansive, majestic realm. By my authority, I bestow upon Maple, the goddess of the earth, the sovereign authority over the earth. Whoosh! Maple's figure was instantly pulled into the divine kingdom. Before she could even process her surroundings, and profoundly mysterious, primordial energy surged directly into her physical form. Without missing a beat, Sito continued his divine decree. I bestow upon Sally, the goddess of shadows, the sovereign authority over shadows. I bestow upon Yukino Shida Haruno, the goddess of fire, the sovereign authority over flame. I bestow upon Kanade, the goddess of music, the sovereign authority over music. I bestow upon Liz, the goddess of forging, the sovereign authority over forging. I bestow upon Chairwoman Minami, the goddess of Kodadama, the sovereign authority over words of power. I bestow upon Hiratsuka Shizuka, the goddess of lightning, the sovereign authority over lightning. Whoosh! Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The 6 newly minted goddesses manifested right beside Maple one after another. Just like her, they instinctively closed their eyes, quietly immersed in aligning their souls with the fundamental authorities granted to them within the divine kingdom. Seeing them adjust, Sito brought up his divine pantheon interface. Pantheon, spatial divine pantheon. Dominant deity, spatial god. Chief deity tier combat power, none. Divine king tier combat power, none. Deity tier combat power, goddess of war, goddess of chaos, goddess of poison, goddess of the earth, goddess of shadows, goddess of fire, goddess of music, goddess of forging, goddess of Kodadama, goddess of lightning, goddess of life. Others, Rigna, natural divinity core fragment. Comprehensive evaluation, deity tier pantheon. Advancement requirements, 1 Divine King tier combat unit, 5 Deity tier combat units. He now officially commanded a substantial assembly of deities. Although their specific individual names didn't display directly on the primary overview panel, a simple tap on the categories would bring up their comprehensive status logs. Sito tapped his chin thoughtfully. Before he had even fully realized it, the number of deities gathered under his banner had already surpassed 10. Next up on the agenda was assisting Queen Rigna, Seiichi Bashira, Queen Mia Snow, and Queen Helan to achieve their own divine ascensions. With that plan locked down, Sito closed the interface and summoned Sora and the remaining members who weren't bound as subordinate deities into the realm. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. So this is your divine kingdom? Sora remarked, casting a discerning eye over the sprawling landscape. Since he wasn't bound as Sito's subordinate deity, he couldn't access this space independently and required Sito to actively anchor him in. Yeah, Sito smiled warmly. What do you think? Not bad at all, Sora shared his genuine impression. At that moment, Maple and the others gradually opened their eyes. Since it was their very first time setting foot inside a proper divine kingdom, they scanned the mystical environment with wide, curious eyes. Wow, so this is our divine kingdom? Maple's eyes sparkled with sheer wonder. Alright, feel free to explore and familiarize yourselves with the place. I need to make a quick trip back to the Snezhnaya Empire, Sito announced, not planning to linger around for too long. After all, Seiichi Bashira and the 3 queens were the only ones left who hadn't ascended yet. With a brief flicker of silver light, Sito exited the divine kingdom. A short while later. The 30th floor of the god domain, the Endless Continent. Deep within the extreme north, inside the capital city of the Snezhnaya Empire. Sito sat quietly on the central throne of the palace's Grand Council Hall, patiently awaiting the arrival of his guests. He had issued a formal summons just moments prior, instructing them to gather here. Clack, clack, clack. The sound of methodical footsteps echoed down the corridor as Seiichi Bashira entered the council hall, flanked by the 3 faction queens. Greetings to the spatial god, the 3 queens spoke in unison, offering a respectful bow. The news of Sito breaking through to godhood had long since spread like wildfire among the floor masters. They had all been eager to secure formal audience gifts to present to him. After all, ascending to godhood was the ultimate, lifelong pursuit of every floor master. However, Sito was rarely physically present within the empire and never active in the public communication channels, making him an exceptionally difficult man to cross paths with. Please, everyone, take a seat, Sito offered with a hospitable smile, gesturing toward the council table. Hearing his invite, Sei Chabashira was the first to smoothly take her seat. The three queens executed another brief, synchronized etiquette bow toward Sito before settling into their respective chairs. The reason I've gathered everyone here today is to discuss the matter of divine ascension, Sito said, cutting straight to the chase without any unnecessary pleasantries. The three queens froze in surprise upon hearing his words. Queen Rigna was the quickest to snap back to attention, her eyes widening slightly. But for Mia Snow and Helen, the revelation hit differently. To be explicitly invited to a private council regarding divine ascension meant that a monumental, life-changing opportunity was being laid out right in front of him. After dropping her head in quiet contemplation for a brief moment, Mia Snow lifted her gaze, her voice laced with intense focus. What exactly are your parameters for us? Thank you for reading. Chapter 294, Chapter 293, Three Queens Ascend to Godhood, Bonus. 1,272 words. Here's the bonus chapter for 100 plus PS. Chapter 293, Three Queens Ascend to Godhood. My parameters are quite simple, but it will require you to become my subordinate deities, Sito answered. Subordinate deities? Mia Snow and Helen exchanged a glance, both falling into deep thought. Since Rigna and Filna were already well versed in the concept of subordinate deities, the two of them naturally understood exactly what it entailed. I have no objections, Helen was the first to speak up. Becoming a subordinate deity was a small price to pay for such a monumental opportunity. It's the same for me, Mia Snow replied. Excellent, Sito nodded, before continuing. Next, let me share a few of my ideas. Of course, whether you agree to this proposal is entirely up to you three queens to decide. Hearing this, the three queens looked at one another. They remained silent, quietly waiting for Sito to elaborate. Sito didn't drag things out and went straight to the point. I intend to have your entire races join my divine pantheon. A divine kingdom populated solely by deities would be far too barren. Therefore, Sito planned to integrate the elf, mermaid, and snow woman races into his own divine pantheon. As for the logistics regarding their respective floors in the god domain, once they joined the divine kingdom, they could easily leave behind a designated force to garrison their old territories, so it wasn't a major issue. The three queens simultaneously fell into contemplation. This was a monumental decision that concerned the future of their entire races, and they needed to carefully weigh the pros and cons. First and foremost, joining the pantheon offered one paramount benefit: boundless longevity. As long as their clansmen integrated into Sito's pantheon, even those who didn't personally break through to godhood would obtain eternal life. This was a foundational right granted by a divine pantheon. Secondly, once their people joined the pantheon, the path to ascension would be unlocked for all of them. This was an incredible boon, though whether they could actually achieve godhood would still depend entirely on their own efforts. However, ascending through this method meant they wouldn't possess a corresponding divinity core, which came with certain drawbacks. Without a divinity core, they wouldn't wield specific primordial authorities, they would merely be ordinary deities. In terms of raw combat power, such deities were practically identical to false gods who possessed shattered divinity core fragments. But overall, it still opened the doors of ascension to their entire population. After all, for anyone who hadn't joined a divine pantheon to unlock the path to ascension, no matter how high their divine energy reserves climbed, they could never truly become a deity without a divinity core. Those were the primary advantages. As for the disadvantages, there was only one: their races would be directly bound by Sito's restrictions. Fortunately, these restrictions weren't overly overbearing. After due consideration, Mia Snow turned her beautiful eyes towards Sito. I have no objections. Neither do I, Helen said with a graceful smile. As for my side, I'll need to consult with Sister Filna first. After all, our elf race is governed by two queens, Rigna added. She personally agreed with the plan, but since the elves were split into two factions under two distinct rulers, she needed to check in with Filna first. Fair enough, Sito nodded. He raised his hand and extracted a concentrated mass of his own divine blood. You can take your time deciding on the integration of your races. For now, drink my divine blood, become my subordinate deities, and ascend to godhood. With that, Sito handed a single drop of pure divine blood to Helan and Mia Snow each, while providing Rigna and Sei Chabashira with enough divine blood to fully catalyze their ascensions. Seeing this, the four women accepted the divine blood without hesitation and drained it in a single gulp. Boom! The moment she swallowed the blood, Rigna's divine breakthrough triggered instantly. Meanwhile, Sito retrieved 2 pristine divinity cores from his inventory. He handed the Blizzard Divinity Core to Mia Snow and the Ocean Divinity Core to Helan. The 2 queens accepted them and immediately began refining the cores. Following right after. Boom! Boom! 2 more monumental shockwaves of divine ascension erupted in tandem. Seeing the sudden surge of energy, Sito hastily shifted all 3 of them into his divine kingdom to stabilize. Sei-sensei, your divine energy is already sufficient for ascension, but I hope you can wait just a little longer. After all, your level isn't maxed out yet. Sito handed the Blade Divinity Core over to her. Don't worry, Sei Chabashira accepted the glowing core and put it away securely. I'm not foolish enough to rush into ascension half prepared. Then let's head into the divine kingdom as well, Sito suggested with a smile. Sei Chabashira nodded in agreement, and Sito promptly transported the 2 of them into his divine realm. Inside the divine kingdom, the 3 queens were deep in the process of finalizing their breakthroughs. Nearby, Hiratsuka Shizuka stood with a cigarette dangling from her lips, casually observing the spectacle. Oh? You didn't head out? Sito asked, walking up to Shizuka. Since everyone else had left the realm to tend to their tasks, he was surprised to see her resting here alone. They all went out to farm their divine energy values. I figured I'd just kick back and relax in the divine kingdom for a bit. Shizuka replied, taking a slow drag of her cigarette. Once someone became a deity, there wasn't a strict routine to follow anymore. They didn't need traditional quests, nor did they need standard level grinding. The only metric that mattered was accumulating divine energy points. However, substantial amounts of divine energy were incredibly tedious to acquire. It was much better to take a casual, slow and steady approach. Hearing her response, Sito smiled and shifted the conversation. In that case, I actually happen to have a task where I could use your help. What is it? Shizuka asked. Sito gently nudged Sei Chabashira forward. Sei-sensei is fully primed for ascension, but her level is lagging behind. I want you to take her out to power level. Killing 1 or 2 false gods should easily do the trick. To the currently ascended Shizuka, false gods were nothing more than ants. It would be a walk in the park for her to carry Sei through a high-yield hunt. No problem, Shizuka nodded, agreeing easily. Sei Chabashira had no objections either, walking over to stand by Shizuka's side. The 2 women exchanged a brief nod before Shizuka tore open a rift and led Sei out of the realm. Left behind in the divine kingdom, Sito turned his attention to monitoring the progress of the 3 queens. Time ticked away. Half an hour later. System announcement: Snow Woman Queen Mia Snow has absorbed your divine blood and officially become a subordinate god under the spatial god. System announcement: you have unlocked the subordinate god status panel. System announcement: current subordinate god count, 13. Subordinate, Goddess of Blizzards Mia Snow, minor deity rank early stage. System announcement: Mermaid Queen Helan has absorbed your divine blood and officially become a subordinate god under the spatial god. System announcement: you have unlocked the subordinate god status panel. System announcement: current subordinate god count, 14. Subordinate, Goddess of the Oceans Helan, minor deity rank early stage. As the final system notifications rang out, Sito looked toward the 3 queens. Radiating a profoundly sacred, pure divine aura, they slowly rose to their feet one after another. Thank you for reading. Chapter 295, Chapter 294, Pranking Error feels absolutely amazing, bonus. 1,384 words. Thank you, at Gray089, for joining the memberships. I'm truly grateful. Chapter 294, Pranking Eri feels absolutely amazing. Is this what it truly feels like to be a deity? The sheer difference in the levels of power is simply astronomical. Queen Helen remarked as she focused inward, feeling the massive reservoirs of energy coursing through her divine form. The dividing line between gods and mortals. If one did not cross the threshold into godhood, one would ultimately remain nothing more than an ant in the grand scheme of reality. I feel exactly the same way, Mia Snow agreed, nodding in tandem with Rigna. Achieving godhood felt absolutely overwhelming. Reflecting on the countless years they had spent desperately searching for a breakthrough, a wave of bittersweet emotion welled up inside them. The path had been excruciatingly long. If it weren't for Sito, they would likely still be wandering aimlessly, searching for a viable method to ascend. Sito offered a gentle smile. With a wave of his hand, he seamlessly bestowed the corresponding regional authorities of his divine kingdom upon the three queens. Sensing a profound, mysterious surge of primordial energy weaving into their souls, the three goddesses hastily closed their eyes to properly assimilate the connection. A brief moment later, they opened them again. So this is the authority of a divine pantheon? Mia Snow looked toward Sito, her eyes shining with immense wonder. The other two goddesses carefully scanned the surrounding horizon. After all, this majestic divine kingdom was where they would be residing for the foreseeable future. Yes, Sito nodded. You are free to enter and exit the divine kingdom as you please. Moving forward, I hope you can expedite the integration of your respective races. Rest assured. There won't be any issues on my end. The moment I return, I will finalize the logistics with Sister Filna. Not a single one of the three queens showed any hesitation. Anyone who failed to grasp a monumental benefit like this would be an absolute fool. After dropping a few more words of advice, Sito logged off and exited the god domain. He was currently visiting Eri's house, after all. Returning to reality, Sito opened his eyes inside Eri's bedroom, just in time to see Eri sitting on her bed working on an illustration. The moment she noticed Sito's figure reanimating, she quickly closed her sketchbook and slid off the mattress. You're finally back. My mom has already finished cooking dinner, let's head downstairs quickly. Eri walked over to his side. She hadn't logged into the game during this entire interval, choosing instead to wait for him to finish his business. Sure thing, Sito nodded. The two of them left the room together, heading down toward the first-floor living room. Truth be told, the interior design of Eri's family home was exceptionally tasteful. The architectural style was entirely unique, luxurious without being gaudy, blending classical elegance with a hint of bold artistic expression. It was refined yet noble, magnificent in its presentation. More than anything, the sheer quality of the furniture and decor radiated an undeniable aura of prestige. As the two of them stepped down the grand staircase, Sawamura Sayuri looked up from the dining table and beamed with a warm, welcoming smile. Sito-kun, Eri, come sit down quickly. Her hospitality was incredibly enthusiastic, though it didn't possess the casual, carefree nature of Mrs. Yokohama. Instead, it carried a refined, structured elegance that strongly resembled Mrs. Yukino Shida. This was perfectly natural, given that Eri's family background was anything but ordinary. It was just a terrible shame about what had happened to Eri's father. Sito vaguely recalled that the man had met an untimely end alongside Tomoya. To be precise, he had tragically lost his life in a severe accident while trying to rescue Tomoya. Thank you, Auntie, Sito offered an elegant smile. He walked over to the dining table with impeccable posture and gracefully pulled out a chair to sit down. His movements were smooth, his demeanor cultured and remarkably gentle. Every single gesture he made practically screamed high society breeding. A barrage of invisible question marks practically materialized over Eri's head. Staring at the flawless gentleman sitting next to her, she was completely dumbfounded. What on earth is he doing? Why is he suddenly acting so formal and sophisticated? Erori couldn't wrap her head around it, internally complaining that Sito was being an absolute show-off. Shaking off her confusion, she took her seat right beside him. Across the table, Sawamura Sayuri's smile widened significantly upon witnessing Sito's behavior. She was absolutely delighted to see that Sito hadn't changed a single bit since they last met. He was still as wonderfully elegant as ever. "Sito-kun, please try the dishes I prepared tonight," Sayuri said, gesturing toward the spread. Braised pork ribs and savory soy-braised pork trotters. Every single dish on the table happened to be one of Sito's personal favorites, which caught him entirely by surprise. It looked like Sayuri had gone to an immense amount of effort. After all, compared to the standard, minimalist light cuisine typical of the local region, traditional, hearty dishes were far more satisfying to eat. "Thank you," Sito smiled. He picked up his chopsticks, delicately lifted a small portion of meat, and chewed slowly with absolute decorum. "It tastes absolutely wonderful." After swallowing the bite, Sito offered a polite compliment. Hearing his praise, Sayuri beamed with genuine happiness. Sitting beside him, Erori grew even more bewildered. She witnessed Sito's eating habits at the academy every single day. The way he usually wolfed down his food was the complete polar opposite of the saintly figure sitting before her now. Furthermore, Erori felt deeply perplexed. Back in junior high, she hadn't paid much attention to the finer details when she brought Sito over a handful of times. But it seemed that every time they returned, she would immediately head straight up to her bedroom, skipping the family meals entirely. She had absolutely zero knowledge regarding how Sito and Sayuri actually interacted in private. Looking at the scene playing out now. Sito, can you please stop acting like that? It's honestly giving me the creeps." Erori muttered, goosebumps breaking out across her arms. "Erori, watch your mouth." Sayuri reprimanded her instantly with a sharp glare. What was wrong with Sito? He was behaving perfectly. Why couldn't her daughter see that? Had Erori grown so lax with her discipline that she would speak to an esteemed guest in such a disrespectful manner? Sayuri was genuinely displeased. Setting everything else aside, considering the fact that Sito had literally saved both her and Erori's lives in the past, Sayuri held a deeply profound affection for the boy. There was no way she was going to let her daughter pick a fight over absolutely nothing. Erori felt an immense wave of grievance wash over her. How is this my fault? He's clearly being incredibly weird. An amused smile played across Sito's face. He absolutely loved scenes like this, where a friend got scolded by their own parent because of him. The sweet satisfaction of pranking someone is truly unmatched. Seeing that Erori had wisely shut her mouth, Sayuri immediately dialed back her stern expression, turning a radiant, affectionate smile back towards Sito. "Sito-kun, don't worry about traveling back home tonight. You should stay over at our place." "Auntie, it seems your house doesn't have any vacant guest rooms at the moment," Sito replied, a look of polite confusion crossing his face. He had just quietly utilized his spatial perception to check the layout of the mansion. While there were technically designated guest rooms, every single one of them was piled high with storage boxes and artistic clutter, making them completely uninhabitable for the night. "Oh, that's not an issue at all," Sayuri replied with a sweet, breezy smile. "You can just sleep in Erori's room tonight. And if that feels a bit too cramped, you're more than welcome to share my bedroom with me instead." "Erori? Huh? Share a room with me? Sito? Sharing a room with the MILF is an option too? What is this bizarre turn of events?" Sito's expression turned thoroughly complex as he cast a lingering, highly intrigued look toward Sayuri. Thank you for reading. Chapter 296, Chapter 295, Sito, I really need to practice my drifting techniques more. 1,433 words. Chapter 295, Sito, I really need to practice my drifting techniques more. Sawamura Sayuri's words carried a fascinating layer of ambiguity. If it had been just her first sentence, it could easily be dismissed as a mother trying to play matchmaker for her daughter and Sito. But that follow-up. Sito couldn't shake the sneaking suspicion that the mature woman might actually be harboring a few suggestive thoughts toward him as well. Yet, looking closely at her serene expression, it didn't quite seem that way either. Unable to fully read her intentions, Sito simply pushed the thought to the back of his mind. I. Aries' blush crept all the way from the base of her neck straight to her face. She desperately wanted to muster up her signature sunder a denial, but found that the sharp retorts she wanted to throw out were completely wedged in her throat. Thud. Without a second thought, Aries bolted up from her chair, buried her face in her hands, and fled upstairs back to her room. Watching her dramatic departure, Sito turned to Sayuri and asked cautiously. "Auntie, what exactly did you mean by that?" "Exactly what I said," Sayuri replied with a sweet, placid smile. Her expression was entirely flawless, leaving Sito with absolutely no clues to dissect. Deciding not to overthink it, he quietly resumed eating his meal, and Sayuri followed suit. The two of them continued their dinner in a companionable, silent rhythm, neither offering another word. 10 minutes later. Having finished his meal, Sito stood up, scooped a fresh bowl of rice, and neatly layered a generous helping of meat and vegetables over it. "Auntie, I'll go bring Airi her dinner first." "Go ahead," Sayuri nodded smoothly, having no objections. Turning on his heel to head up to the second floor, Sito found himself contemplating the situation once more. Even if Sayuri's second comment had just been a playful jest, the heavy hint dropped in her first sentence was blindingly obvious. Imagining Airi's iconic twin tails, Sito decided that as a self-proclaimed degenerate of culture, he was absolutely staying over tonight. A moment later. Arriving outside Airi's bedroom, Sito placed his hand on the knob and gave it a gentle twist. The door was unlocked. Stepping inside, he quietly clicked the door shut behind him. Airi was curled up in her computer chair, her arms wrapped tightly around her legs, using her knees to shield her brilliantly flushed face from view. "Airi, eat something first," Sito said, walking over and extending the bowl toward her. "Stare." Airi didn't say a word, her wide blue eyes locked intently onto him. "What is it?" Sito asked, tilting his head in confusion. "Sito, have you ever actually liked me?" Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Airi let out a tiny, incredibly timid whisper. Judging by the pitch of her voice, she was thoroughly embarrassed. "Now how am I supposed to answer that?" Sito tapped his chin, feigning deep contemplation. After a long pause, he looked directly at her and smiled mischievously. "Of course I do. I like all beautiful girls. What can I say? I'm an absolute degenerate of culture." Sito was a man fully dedicated to building his own grand crystal palace, after all. Having been blessed to traverse into a massive anime crossover world, it would be a disservice to his past life dreams if he didn't establish a proper harem. Ugh. Airi's face flushed an even deeper shade of crimson. She subconsciously blocked out the second half of his sentence entirely. Her mind was in a state of absolute chaos, spinning so fast she felt completely dizzy. Sito set the bowl down on her desk and quietly waited for her to compose herself. But as the silence stretched on and Airi remained completely frozen, he began to feel a bit restless. Wandering idly around the room, he casually pulled open her wardrobe. Oh? Spying a hidden stack of custom illustrations tucked away inside, Sito pulled them out to take a closer look. A few moments later, Sito's eyes widened in sheer astonishment. Holy moly! He had initially assumed that the private doujinshi she drew featuring him and Tatsuka Saika was scandalous enough, but he never expected to find a hidden treasure trove featuring explicitly him and Airi. This was... With a highly amused, wicked expression, Sito turned back toward the bed. By now, Airi had snapped out of her daze and looked over. The exact moment her eyes registered the specific manuscripts clutched in Sito's hands, her soul practically left her body. She suffered an instant social death, her head practically venting steam like a boiling kettle. Sito grinned, carefully sliding the artwork back into its hiding place. He walked over to the edge of the bed and seamlessly swept her up into his arms. What do you think you're doing?" Aerie gasped, startled into a token, feeble struggle. I just feel like the pacing in your illustrations is a bit unrealistic, so I've decided to help you perform some practical field research. Huh? You. Twin tails have their own unique tactical advantages, you know? You clearly haven't mastered the core essence of the technique yet. The next morning at 5 a.m. Inside Aerie's bedroom. Sito sat resting in the computer chair, glancing briefly at Aerie who was fast asleep under the covers, before dropping his head in quiet reflection. A brand new battlefield, an entirely fresh dance of offense and defense. For a high-speed drifting technique like this, Sito felt he really needed to log more practice hours in the future. After all, he had only recently acquired his driver's license. Stretching his arms over his head, Sito let out a relaxed yawn. Once he headed to the academy today, he would have to ask Hiratsuka Shizuka to officially log a day off for Aerie. Given her current delicate physical condition, there was absolutely no way she could handle attending classes today. Stepping out of the bedroom, he made his way down toward the first floor. As he passed by Sayuri's bedroom, he noticed the door was left slightly ajar and instinctively glanced inside. There sat Sawamura Sayuri, sporting a pair of prominent dark circles under her eyes, staring dead at him with a deeply resentful gaze. Do you have any idea how incredibly loud it was last night? Sayuri's tone was entirely laced with a sleepy, exhausted grievance. Loud? Sito replied, perfectly calm and unbothered. Perhaps I'm simply too powerful. What can I say? It gets remarkably lonely at the top. Sawamura Sayuri. Her lips parted, but she found herself completely at a loss for words. But setting everything else aside, she had to admit, Sito truly was devastatingly powerful. Go ahead and fix your own breakfast today. I desperately need to get some sleep. Sayuri murmured wearily. She could finally get some proper shut-eye now. Have a good rest, Auntie Sito chuckled softly, turning to leave. Staring at his retreating back, a soft, warm blush crept back onto Sayuri's cheeks. I definitely have to seek his guidance and test his mettle myself when the opportunity arises. With that firm resolution locked away in her heart, Sayuri closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep. Down in the first-floor living room, Sito walked over to the main entrance, stepped outside, and gently pulled the heavy door shut behind him. Since Aerie and her mother were both sound asleep, he figured he might as well head back to his own place to eat. It was the perfect opportunity to pick up some fresh breakfast on the way. Strolling leisurely down the peaceful streets, Sito maintained a lazy, relaxed stride. The early morning sun cast its golden rays across the landscape, coating the town in a brilliant, warm overlay. There weren't many pedestrians out yet, the few people around were mostly residents purchasing breakfast or vendors opening up their small storefronts. This kind of tranquil, harmonious scenery could only be truly appreciated during the early hours of the morning. After walking for about half an hour, Sito stepped into a familiar local breakfast diner to purchase a fresh batch of steamed buns and fried dough sticks. Having finalized the mobile transfer payment, he stepped out of the shop, intending to head straight home. However, the exact moment he crossed the threshold, a familiar, pleasant voice called out from his side. Oh? Sito-kun, you're out buying breakfast early too? Sito turned his head toward the source, only to find Nishimiya Yeko staring back at him with an expression of pleasant surprise. Thank you for reading. Chapter 297, Chapter 296, Seeking an Alternative Route Through Asuna's Parents. 1,294 words. Chapter 296, Seeking an Alternative Route Through Asuna's Parents. Auntie, you're up way too early, Sito said, genuinely surprised. What time was it? It wasn't even 6 o'clock yet. The morning breakfast stalls had barely finished setting up. He really hadn't expected Nishimiya Yeko to be out and about at such an hour. Well, I've had a lot of free time on my hands lately, Yeko replied, her expression placid. She had indeed been much more relaxed recently. Ever since she transitioned to playing the God Domain game full-time at home, she felt the burdens of daily life melting away. Compared to her past struggles, her current life was infinitely better. Boss, give me 6 steamed buns and 3 bowls of soy milk, please. Coming right up. The stall owner neatly packaged the breakfast and handed it over. Yaeko settled the payment, accepted the food, and began walking back toward the apartment complex side by side with Sito. As them strolled down the street, Yaeko glanced sideways at him. I heard from Yuzuru recently. Are you and Shoko officially dating now? Yes, Sito nodded directly. Do you intend to have multiple wives and concubines, just like the ancients did? Yaeko asked, thinking of Kurukuru Uemu and Kanade Tachibana who lived with him. Sito turned his head to study her. Her face remained entirely blank, making it impossible to discern what she was actually thinking. Even so, he had no intention of dodging the question. Yes. Things were bound to come to light sooner or later. Since she had brought it up, he saw no reason to deny it. Yaeko fell into a brief silence. After a few moments, she spoke in a sample, measured tone. I don't particularly object to your lifestyle. However, I must give you one piece of advice: remember to practice moderation. Don't take your health for granted just because you're young. When you get older, you'll understand what true regret feels like. Sito was utterly dumbfounded. Holy moly! Is she implying that I'm going to exhaust myself? What an absolute joke. I am a literal deity. How could I possibly end up frail and weak like a regular mortal? Sito grumbled internally. Engaged in casual conversation, the two of them quickly reached the apartment complex. Arriving on the second floor, Sito unlocked his front door with his key and stepped inside. In the living room, Kurukuru Uemu and Kanade Tachibana were already awake, looking as though they had just finished washing up. Did you bring breakfast back? Kurukuru Uemu asked, stepping forward to seamlessly take the bags from his hands. Yeah, Sito replied, walking over to sit down at the dining table. The Divine War is scheduled to kick off tonight. Make sure you both get properly prepared when the time comes. Tetzel Deus Race was a massive pantheon. It wasn't comprised solely of Aratosh, the god of war, which meant there were bound to be quite a few hidden deities lurking in the wings. Kurukuru Uemu nodded firmly in understanding, while Kanade trotted over to Sito's side and sat down quietly. The three of them began enjoying their breakfast together. Time flew by in a flash. In the blink of an eye, the clock struck 8 a.m. Today was Thursday, which meant tomorrow was Friday. Sobu High Academy was scheduled to host its annual sports festival this coming Friday. At Sobu High, on the third floor of the main teaching building, Class 1D was waiting. Sito's very first class of the day happened to be with them, so he stepped confidently into the room. The exact moment he entered, the entire roster of Class 1D turned their attention toward him. Ahem. Sito cleared his throat, scanning the room. This period will be self-study. As expected. The students thought in unison. Sito had been working as a proxy teacher for over a day now. However, he hadn't actually taught a single structured lesson. Every time he entered a classroom, he would invariably deflect his duties with a simple self-study command. Fortunately, the students of Class 1D couldn't care less. Thanks to Sito, they were all guaranteed to pull flawless, perfect scores on their upcoming exams anyway. Seeing that everyone had already pulled out their smartphones to entertain themselves, Sito began scanning the room for his designated target. Eruri wasn't present today. Since she desperately needed rest, Sito had already requested a formal leave of absence on her behalf through Hiratsuka Shizuka. Right now, Sito's gaze was firmly locked onto the girl universally renowned as the fairy queen, Asunayuki. As one of his absolute favorite heroines from his past life, he naturally had zero intention of letting her slip through his fingers. With that thought in mind, Sito casually dragged a chair over and seated himself directly next to her. Sito-kun, what are you doing? Asuna's cheeks flushed a delicate shade of pink, though she quickly managed to regain her composure. Yukino Shida and the others merely cast helpless, exasperated glances in his direction, choosing to mind their own business rather than intervene. Don't mind me, Asuna-san, just focus on whatever you're doing, Sito chuckled softly. Hearing his words, Asuna paid him no further mind and returned her focus to browsing the news on her phone. Sito took this opportunity to boldly analyze her features. To be perfectly fair, Asuna might not have been the single most breathtaking beauty in the entire class, but she was hands down the most enduringly charming and elegant girl among them. Moreover, considering her natural, ideal wife demeanor, Sito knew that marrying a girl like her would be an absolute jackpot. 5 minutes ticked past. Sito-kun, why do you keep staring at me like that? Asuna asked, her face completely red. Being intensely scrutinized by an exceptionally handsome boy was making her incredibly shy. Oh, I just think you look incredibly beautiful, Sito teased playfully. Sito-kun, you really shouldn't entertain such thoughts, Asuna said, shaking her head gently. My parents are incredibly traditional. They strictly believe in monogamy. You're already intimately involved with so many girls in our class, there is absolutely no way they would ever give you their blessing. Asuna laid her parents' rigid expectations completely bare. Although she hadn't explicitly stated her own personal feelings on the matter, her family's strict principles effectively disqualified Sito from the running. Is that so? Sito's expression turned remarkably playful. What would happen if I simply revealed my true, transcendent identity to her parents? If I can't make any leeway from Asuna's side, then I'll just target her parents directly. Time to find an alternative route. Having finalized his plan, Sito decided he would pay a private visit to the Yuki residence in a little while. By the time Asuna returned home later today, she was bound to receive a massive, unforgettable surprise. Yes, it's true, Asuna nodded softly, completely unaware of his scheme. Fair enough, Sito dropped the topic, offering no further arguments. The period drew to a rapid close. The moment the bell rang, Sito exited the classroom and immediately utilized his spatial displacement to vanish from the school grounds. In a luxurious villa located within Chiba City, a middle-aged man and an elegant, upper-class woman were currently seated in the spacious living room, carefully reviewing financial documents. They were none other than Asuna Yuki's parents. Ding dong. Suddenly, the crisp ring of the front doorbell echoed through the house, causing the couple to exchange a look of mild surprise. I'll go see who it is, Asuna's father said, standing up and stepping out into the courtyard. The moment he approached the grand front gates, his eyes fell upon a white-haired youth standing outside, someone he didn't recognize in the slightest. Thank you for reading. Chapter 298, Chapter 297, Approaching the Parents Directly to Arrange a Match. Bonus. 1,521 words. Thank you, at peers, for joining the memberships. I'm truly grateful. Bonus, 1/1. Chapter 297, Approaching the Parents Directly to Arrange a Match. Asuna's father felt deeply perplexed. His eyes locked onto the elegantly wrapped gifts clutched in Sito's hands. They looked like high-end liquor. Is he here to deliver gifts? But who exactly is this boy? Could he be the son of one of my old business associates? In an instant, a flurry of names crossed his mind. He didn't recognize this white-haired youth at all, but there was a distinct possibility that the boy belonged to one of his longtime associates. And you are? Asuna's father voiced his confusion aloud. Greetings, Uncle Yuki. Sito maintained a polite smile as he retrieved his official military credentials and extended them forward. Asuna's father stepped toward the grand gate, accepting the ID booklet and opening it. The moment his eyes registered the embossed insignia and titles inside, his posture stiffened. So it is Sito. His tone carried a mixture of intense reverence and sheer, unexpected awe. Inside, his mind was spinning at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Why on earth has a monumental figure like this personally shown up at my doorstep? Furthermore, is this even something a civilian business tycoon like me is permitted to know about? A cold sweat broke out across his forehead. Without a single second of hesitation, he threw the grand gates wide open and gestured with utmost deference. Please, come inside. This was the sheer convenience brought forth by an absolute, transcendent status. Uncle, These are just a few tokens of appreciation I brought for you and Auntie, Sito said smoothly as he stepped into the courtyard, handing the premium gifts over. Thank you so much. Asuna's father accepted them with both hands, before quickly adding, let's head inside to talk. The courtyard isn't an appropriate place to hold a proper conversation. With that, he respectfully handed the military credentials back. Sito accepted them, slipped them back into his personal Kamui dimension, and followed the master of the house into the main villa. The moment they stepped across the threshold, Asuna's mother looked up from the lounge. The exact instant her gaze landed on Sito, she froze in her tracks. What a spectacularly handsome young man. And he has white hair. Her eyes lit up with aesthetic appreciation. Turning toward her husband, she quickly whispered, "Who is this young man? Introduce us." Asuna's father frantically rushed forward, grabbing his wife's hand and pulling her into a secluded corner of the foyer. The couple engaged in a frantic, hushed whisper. A brief moment later, Asuna's mother turned her attention back to Sito. But this time, the look in her eyes had completely transformed, replaced by an overwhelming mixture of profound awe, reverence, and nervous tension. "Please, Sito-kun, have a seat. Make yourself comfortable." Asuna's mother rolled out the hospitality instantly, her voice trembling slightly. "Uncle, Auntie, there's absolutely no need to be so formal with me," Sito offered a gentle, disarming smile. "To be completely candid, the primary purpose of my visit today is to formally propose a marriage alliance." The Yuki parents? The couple exchanged a stunned look, completely paralyzed by the sudden declaration. A marriage proposal? What on earth? Their minds raced as they analyzed the situation. Sito looked remarkably young, which meant the only logical target for a marriage proposal in this household had to be their daughter, Asuna. The moment the realization clicked, their eyes shone with immense, unbridled excitement. This was a phenomenal stroke of good fortune. Originally, they had intended to wait until Asuna graduated from university before arranging a strategic marriage alliance with one of the most powerful elite families in the region. They never could have anticipated that a transcendent titan would actively march up to their doorstep to propose a union first. To them, whether a family was a massive corporate dynasty or a small elite clan, strategic marriage alliances were always the paramount objective. If it could elevate their family's standing to unprecedented heights, why would they ever refuse? Come. Sito-kun, please sit down. Yes. I'll go brew some fresh tea right away. Asuna's father enthusiastically guided Sito over to the sofa, while her mother practically sprinted to the kitchen to prepare refreshments. Now that they knew Sito was here to establish a marriage alliance, their stifling formality evaporated, replaced by absolute eagerness. Witnessing their instantaneous 180-degree transformation, Sito couldn't help but marvel internally at how incredibly useful a high-ranking status truly was. Asuna's mother quickly returned with a tray of refreshments, sliding into the adjacent seat and placing a porcelain cup before Sito. Please, try some. This is premium Longjing tea, the absolute highest grade, Asuna's father chuckled merrily, his face beaming. Thank you. Sito lifted the cup and took a refined sip. Sito-kun, Asuna's father immediately pivoted straight to the main objective. Do you and Asuna already know each other? The fact that Sito had come directly to their estate to propose a marriage alliance heavily implied that he had already met or was well acquainted with Asuna. Yes, we are quite well acquainted. However, I didn't approach her directly to discuss this matter, Sito answered with a calm, charming smile. I felt it would be much better to finalize the betrothal through the traditional channels first. Since you are her parents, I came straight to you. Hearing this, the couple nodded in profound agreement. Indeed, while the current era championed the concept of free love, Asuna's parents were deeply traditional at heart. However, as for whether Asuna would actually agree to the arrangement, they would still have to wait for her input. Even so, the Yuki parents were already over the moon with Sito. Setting everything else aside, his singular status as a within the superhuman core was more than enough to completely crush any other suitor in existence. We have absolutely no objections to this matter. However, we should still wait for Asuna to return home from school before finalizing the details, Asuna's father suggested after a brief moment of deliberation. That's perfectly fine by me, Sito replied smoothly. Sito-kun, do you firmly believe in a monogamous marriage structure? Asuna's mother suddenly chimed in, asking rather tentatively. When it came to this specific aspect, she was still quite conservative. After all, a standard one-husband, one-wife dynamic made for a much more stable household post-marriage. There's absolutely no need to ask such a question, Asuna's father interrupted, shaking his head firmly. For someone of Sito-kun's stature, it doesn't matter how many wives he chooses to take. The only reason he was being so incredibly flexible was simply because the young man sitting across from him was Sito. If it had been anyone else, a suggestion like that would have been shut down instantly. One had to remember exactly who the of the superhuman core was. He was the number one player in the entire god domain. And the number one player was currently renowned across the globe as the magnificent, transcendent spatial god. Therefore, even if Sito intended to build a massive harem, Asuna's father wouldn't raise a single finger in protest. After all, an undeniable, eternal chasm existed between gods and mere mortals. Hearing her husband's sharp dismissal, Asuna's mother wisely closed her mouth, dropping the topic entirely. Sito, meanwhile, maintained a highly amused, peculiar expression. Holy moly! I haven't even brought up the topic of my other relationships, and the father-in-law has already given his full, unprompted blessing? Sito-kun, what is your current family situation like? Asuna's father asked, smoothly shifting the conversation. Hearing the query, Sito began giving a detailed overview of his personal background. As the conversation stretched on and Sito laid out his circumstances, the Yuki couple grew increasingly ecstatic. Real estate, immense wealth, and supreme societal status were a given. Sito lacked absolutely none of those things. But what truly delighted them was his immediate household dynamic. Sito had no siblings, and his parents had passed away long ago. To them, this was the absolute ideal scenario for Asuna. The couple knew exactly how agonizing and complex mother-in-law relations could be in high society. A background like Sito's would save them an immeasurable amount of domestic headache down the line. At worst, if grandchildren entered the picture in the future, the two of them could easily step in to help raise them. However, reflecting on the solid fact that Sito was a literal, living deity, their expressions turned wonderfully complex. What exactly would a child born between a god and a mortal be? A demigod? That child would likely be infinitely more adorable, intelligent, and gifted than any ordinary human baby, right? The two of them began sharing a silly, daydreaming smile. Shaking off his reverie, Asuna's father turned back to Sito with a warm gaze. Sito-kun, we are exceptionally satisfied with your circumstances. Why don't you stay over for the day? Relax here at the villa, and we can finalize everything the moment Asuna finishes her classes this afternoon. Thank you for reading. Chapter 299, Chapter 298, Asuna is completely dumbfounded. Asuna is utterly gobsmacked? 1,413 words. Chapter 298, Asuna is completely dumbfounded. Asuna is utterly gobsmacked. Uncle, Auntie, I'll head back for now and return later this afternoon, Sito said after a brief moment of deliberation. He had no classes scheduled for the afternoon, which made it the perfect time to visit the Yuki household. No problem at all, the Yuki couple nodded in unison. Sito rose from his seat, and the couple personally escorted him to the grand front gates. With a brief nod, he utilized his spatial displacement and vanished on the spot. Watching him disappear into thin air, the husband and wife exchanged a look of sheer awe. As unexpected of the number one player in the god domain, Asuna's father marveled, letting out a deep sigh of admiration. Come on, let's head inside and get everything ready. Sito-kun and Asuna will both be here this afternoon, Asuna's mother reminded him with an eager smile. Right you are. With their plans aligned, the two hurried back into the villa to prepare. Meanwhile, back at Sobu High Academy, inside the first-year faculty office. Sito was currently leaning comfortably against Hiratsuka Shizuka's shoulder, taking a relaxed midday break. Shizuka-sensei, who exactly is in charge of running tomorrow's sports festival? Sito asked idly, his voice laced with a lazy calm. The student council, usually. It's always been their responsibility in previous years, Shizuka replied smoothly. Tomorrow's festival was specifically designed to test the supernatural abilities of the entire Sobu High School student body. The mayor would undoubtedly make a personal appearance for the occasion. However, Sito wasn't entirely sure if the faculty members would be subjected to the evaluation as well. Reflecting on the handful of individuals in his circle who had already broken through to true godhood, Sito couldn't help but chuckle. If they were to actually go all out during the testing, the entire planet would probably end up suffering from the collateral damage. Adopting a completely carefree attitude, Sito wrapped his arms around Shizuka, closing his eyes to doze off against her shoulder. Nearby, a few of the other teachers couldn't help but twitch their lips in sheer exasperation. These two are being way too flagrant. Publicly flaunting their affection right in the middle of the office? The faculty members desperately felt the urge to march over and give Sito a solid reality check. Time flew by, and the academy soon transitioned into the midday lunch break. Instead of heading to the cafeteria with Shizuka and Seiichi Bashira, Sito made his way straight toward Class 1D Swish. Stepping through the rear entrance of the classroom, he naturally walked over and slid into a seat right next to Maple. A sizable group had already gathered around the desk. Aside from Sally, Shoko Nishimiya, Yukino Shida, and Yui Yugahama were all present, settling down with their lunches. Sito-kun, are you joining us for lunch today too? Sally asked, looking over with an inquisitive glance. Of course. Sito nodded with a grin, seamlessly retrieving his premium bento box straight from his Kamui dimension. Sito-kun, have you been staying out late and avoiding going home recently? Maple suddenly chimed in, tossing out an unexpected question. Sito blinked, momentarily caught off guard. It was true that he hadn't been sleeping at his own apartment for the past couple of days, but how on earth did Maple find out? Her residence wasn't anywhere near his, so logistically speaking, she shouldn't have known a thing about his schedule. Could it be? Sito scanned the faces around the table, his gaze eventually locking onto a slightly blushing Yukino Shida. Shoko Nishimiya wouldn't randomly pry into his personal affairs, and Yui didn't live near his complex either. The only person who could have possibly tipped them off was Yukino. Sensing his intense scrutiny, Yukino swiftly turned her head to the side, completely ignoring his gaze. Her flustered, evasive demeanor immediately confirmed Sito's suspicions. I've just had a few pressing matters to attend to these past 2 days, Sito answered with a flawless, casual smile. Oh, is that so? Maple turned her gaze toward Yukino. Having received a smooth explanation, Yukino didn't believe a single word of it. However, she was far too embarrassed to press the matter any further, finding the topic a bit too delicate to speak of openly. The group then settled back into a comfortable rhythm and continued enjoying their meal. Once lunch concluded, Sito returned to the faculty lounge to pass the time before his afternoon rendezvous. The subsequent periods were brief and drew to a rapid close. Before making his departure, Sito stopped by to offer a quick greeting to Ichika Nakano. He originally wanted to fulfill his tutoring duties for the quintuplets, but unfortunately, his schedule was completely packed today. Seeing Ichika's visibly disappointed expression, Sito offered a firm guarantee, promising her that he would absolutely visit their apartment tomorrow. Only then did her downcast face instantly light up with a vibrant smile. Without a moment's delay, Sito utilized his spatial displacement and materialized directly outside the grand gates of the Yuki family villa. Ding dong. He pressed the intercom and waited patiently. A brief moment later, Asuna's father hurried out from the main building. Sito-kun, you're finally here. Come inside, come inside. Asuna should be arriving home any minute now. With a beaming smile, he threw the gates wide open and eagerly ushered Sito into the estate. Thank you, uncle, Sito offered a polite smile, stepping through the threshold. The two entered the grand living room, where Asuna's mother had been waiting anxiously for quite some time. She quickly stepped forward to welcome him. Come, Sito-kun, let's sit down and relax. Our Asuna will be back shortly. Sounds perfect. Meanwhile, the perspective shifts over to Asuna Yuki. Outside the Grand Yuki estate, a luxury sedan pulled up to the curb. Asuna stepped out of the rear passenger seat and turned toward the driver's side window. Thank you, driver. You may head back for the day. Understood, young miss, the driver replied respectfully, shifting into gear and smoothly pulling away. Asuna walked through the main gates and crossed the spacious front courtyard. Arriving at the grand double doors of the villa, she retrieved her house keys and unlocked the main entrance. Click. As the heavy door swung open, a burst of lively laughter echoed straight from the living room. Ha ha ha, I never would have guessed that you were actually working as a proxy teacher at Sobu High, Sito-kun. Oh, it's just a temporary gig I picked up on a whim, uncle. Now, don't be modest. With your exceptional caliber, a position like that is a walk in the park. Asuna. A massive barrage of invisible question marks instantly flooded Asuna's mind, leaving her entirely bewildered. Why on earth is Sito's voice echoing from inside my house? What is going on here? She hurriedly stepped through the foyer and peered into the living room. There sat her parents, engaged in an incredibly merry, harmonious conversation with Sito. Asuna. Utterly dumbfounded, Asuna froze right on the spot. It really was Sito. What kind of bizarre scenario am I looking at right now? Asuna was completely losing her grip on reality. The fact that Sito had suddenly materialized inside her family home, and was getting along so phenomenally well with her strictly traditional parents, made it glaringly obvious that they had already reached some sort of mutual understanding. Oh Asuna, you're back. Come over here and sit down quickly. Seeing her daughter standing frozen in the entryway, Asuna's mother quickly rose to her feet, trotted over, and affectionately dragged her into the living area. Before Asuna could even process what was happening, she was guided straight over to the sofa and seated directly next to Sito. And before she could even open her mouth to demand an explanation, her father offered a jovial, ear-to-ear grin. Asuna, take a look and tell us what you think of Sito-kun. Your mother and I have already discussed it, and we intend to finalize a formal betrothal between the two of you. However, we wanted to properly consult you and get your input first. Asuna? Hearing her father's casual declaration, Asuna was completely gobsmacked. A betrothal? What kind of insane plot progression is this? Furthermore, Asuna whipped her head around, her wide eyes locking onto Sito as she instinctively blurted out, "Why on earth are you inside my house?" Thank you for reading. Chapter 300, Chapter 299, The Divine War Begins. First match. Disboards Humanity. 1439 words. Chapter 299, The Divine War Begins. First match. Disboards Humanity. Asuna's startled shriek instantly drew the attention of the other three in the room. Asuna, don't make such a big fuss over nothing, her father said, his face hardening into a stern expression. Exactly. Just spend some time together and see how things go. It's really not that big of a deal, her mother chimed in from the side, supporting her husband. Hearing this, Asuna fell completely silent. Spending some time together wasn't necessarily the issue, but... Father, mother, didn't you both always insist on strict monogamy? Asuna blurted out. Her father waved a hand dismissively. Ha, that's for ordinary people. That's right, her mother added seamlessly. Sito-kun's status is completely different from theirs. It doesn't matter how many wives he chooses to take. Asuna. She could see the reality of the situation clearly now. Her parents were exceptionally satisfied with Sito. Otherwise, there was absolutely no way they would ever say something so entirely out of character. But why? Could it really be solely because Sito had ascended to godhood? Let's talk about this tomorrow. I'm heading upstairs for today. Asuna's face flushed a brilliant shade of crimson as she hastily rose from her seat and beat a swift retreat. While she secretly harbored a few romantic expectations about falling in love, this sudden arrangement, it was definitely best to drop it for now. My, look at her. Asuna's mother sighed, a look of mild embarrassment crossing her face. She's simply been spoiled too much, her father muttered helplessly. Sito turned his gaze back toward the couple and offered a smooth smile. Uncle, Auntie, Asuna didn't explicitly say she was against the idea. How about I visit her at school tomorrow to properly talk things through? Hearing his reassuring words, the husband and wife nodded in unison. I suppose that's our best option for now. Sito-kun, why don't you stay over to have dinner with us? The couple asked, their warm, welcoming smiles returning in full force. Thank you, but I'll have to pass, Sito replied, shaking his head. I really need to head back home. I actually have a few critical matters to attend to tonight. Accomplishing this much today was more than enough. It was time to return home and fully prepare for the grand divine war scheduled for tonight. Seeing his firm stance, the couple stood up in tandem. Since you have pressing matters to tend to, Sito-kun, we won't keep you any longer. Come, let us escort you out. As the transcendent spatial god, it was only natural that Sito had monumental responsibilities to balance. Furthermore, given his highly unique status, the couple wouldn't dare delay him. There's no need to escort me out, Uncle, Auntie. I'll be sure to visit you again soon, Sito declined with a polite wave, indicating that they could stay inside. Alright, Sito-kun, you are truly considerate. We'll do as you say, then. The two looked at each other and spoke almost simultaneously. With a final nod, Sito utilized his spatial displacement and vanished from the villa. Time flew by, and the clock soon struck 7:30 p.m. Inside the 30th floor of the god domain, upon the sweeping expanse of the endless continent's extreme north. Outside the grand imperial palace of the Snezhnaya Empire's capital city, Sito stood at the highest apex of the grand stone staircase. His gaze was profoundly majestic as it swept across the massive gathering of imperial high officials stationed below. The Fatui Harbingers stood at the absolute vanguard of the formation, with the three newly ascended queens standing proudly shoulder to shoulder with them. Behind them, a sea of imperial soldiers and members of the Fatui Guild waited in absolute silence for Sito to speak. A literal human ocean completely blanketed the capital's grand square. Every single soul gathered here was fully armed and primed for the impending crusade. I shall keep my directives brief, Sito's voice boomed across the plaza, laced with absolute divine authority. Gods shall clash with gods, and mortals shall wage war against mortals. Remember to follow your chains of command implicitly. Understood. The moment his words fell, the massive host of soldiers roared their assent in unison. The sound was like a torrential shockwave, shattering the clouds and echoing across the heavens. Sito nodded in immense satisfaction, instantly circulating his primordial divine energy. Boom! A massive pillar of divine light cascaded from the heavens, instantly enveloping every single fatuous and imperial commander standing on the steps. In the literal blink of an eye, the vanguard vanished from the spot, seamlessly transported into the staging grounds of his divine kingdom. Taking one last look at the grand army of soldiers and guild members who were currently scanning the layout of his divine realm with awe, Sito triggered his personal teleportation and exited the lair. Half an hour later. Within the cosmic expanse of the domain of the gods. Hovering just outside the atmosphere of Disboard, the dedicated gaming world within the divine domain, the god of play, Tet, suddenly sensed a dramatic shift in the celestial currents. Having already alerted every single living soul on the planet below regarding the impending world war, he grinned and looked up toward the starry firmament. They're finally here. Tet let out a cheerful chuckle, flying up into the skies with absolute composure. Piercing through the dense cloud cover, he stabilized his form in the vacuum of outer space. Simultaneously, a brilliant streak of light tore through the distant starry expanse as Sito flew forward, coming to a smooth halt exactly 100 meters away from Tet. You finally arrived, Tet said, his grin widening. Yeah, Sito nodded smoothly before releasing Sora from his spatial storage. The moment Sora materialized, his form hovered effortlessly right alongside Sito. For tonight's divine war, Sora wasn't required to participate in active combat, so Sito simply kept him by his side to witness the spectacle firsthand. Well then, let the games begin. Tet snapped his fingers with a theatrical flourish. Hearing the cue, Sito didn't hesitate for a single second. He immediately unsealed his divine kingdom, releasing the massive vanguard host down upon the planet below. Swish, swish, swish. Down on Disboard, the 16 sentient races of the Exceed simultaneously sensed a monumental cosmic anomaly, their gazes instinctively turning toward the territories of humanity. Within the boundaries of the human realm, countless forces belonging to the Snezhnaya Empire materialized directly inside Elkia, the grand capital city of the Elkian kingdom. As the massive army flooded the streets, countless human citizens looked on, their faces instantly contorting into sheer, unadulterated panic. They had all clearly heard the booming, transcendent voice of their god just yesterday, decreeing that an army from another world would descend today to wage a war that would determine the fate of their reality. A war that even the gods themselves would actively participate in. What is this? They're the invaders from the alternate world. We're doomed. We're absolutely doomed. The very first territory they chose to assault is our human kingdom. Damn it all. A massive commotion tore through the civilian crowds. Humanity was universally recognized as the absolute weakest, most defenseless race in the entire world. Even though the invading forces before them were technically humans as well, one single look at their flawless, battle-hardened steel armor and menacing aura made it glaringly obvious that these outsiders were anything but ordinary. Step, step, step. Emerging from the center of the command formation, the diminutive and adorable figure of Shiro stepped forward, positioning herself at the absolute vanguard of the Harbingers. Lord Harbinger, shall we initiate the deployment now? Shirogane, a Grand General of the Imperial Army, stepped up to Shiro's side. His expression was thoroughly solemn as he awaited her final command. Shiro's gaze remained entirely cold as she let out a soft, melodic whisper. Those who resist, execute. Secure the perimeter, and take absolute control of this kingdom. Though her voice was incredibly gentle, the underlying killing intent woven into her words was devastatingly thick. Understood. Shirogane cupped his fists firmly, before spinning around to face the massive legions of the Imperial host. Soldiers of the Empire. Secure this kingdom immediately. Execute anyone who dares to resist. Kill. 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 Gale. Forward, like a raging gale. Thud, 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 thud. The exact moment the command was roared across the skies, the Imperial legions and guild members surged forward like an unstoppable, iron-blooded tide, instantly launching a flawless, high-efficiency siege campaign to lock down the capital. Thank you for reading. Chapter 301, Chapter 300, Upping the Ante. The Suniaster? The Spatial Set? 1,563 words. Chapter 300, Upping the Ante. The Suniaster? The Spatial Set? Run. Hurry, run. How on earth do these humans possess supernatural powers? This isn't even a battle on the same magnitude. Get out of here, quickly. Within the Elkian kingdom, countless civilians shrieked in absolute terror. Facing the battle-hardened Imperial soldiers and guild members of the Snezhnaya Empire who wielded extraordinary abilities, they were like mere ants. A large-scale battlefield of this nature was nothing short of a one-sided massacre. Beyond the starry firmament, Sito, who was currently observing the planetary war unfolding below, casually manifested 3 chairs and a table into the void. Have a seat, he said. Sustaining the furniture with his divine energy, Sito was the first to settle down. Tet and Sora followed suit, taking their respective seats. Sito then retrieved a pot of freshly brewed tea and 3 porcelain cups. Pouring the steaming liquid, he smoothly handed a cup to each of his companions. I must admit, I didn't expect you to choose the weakest race as your initial point of entry, Tet remarked after taking a sip of tea, a cheerful grin returning to his face. Sito and Sora exchanged a look, before simultaneously letting out a knowing smirk. Isn't that just common sense? Sora grinned, his lips curling upward. The moment you chose to look down on humanity, you effectively determined our point of attack. Precisely, Cedo added, taking an elegant sip of his tea with a calm smile. Humanity possesses limitless latent potential. The weakest can ultimately overthrow the strongest. On this planet of yours, countless races have been blessed with their own inherent advantages, yet humanity was given absolutely nothing. Granted, back in the original anime world, the legendary sibling duo Blink had always proclaimed that humanity's greatest weapon was its intellect. However, if the two of them hadn't intervened in this reality, the entire human kingdom of Elkia would have eventually been gambled away down to the very last cent. So strictly speaking, it was simply because Blink was far too overpowered. He, Tet looked between Cedo and Sora, an expression of profound intrigue flashing across his eyes. Does that mean you're completely certain of an absolute victory? No, Sora shook his head. While I wouldn't call it an absolute certainty, we definitely possess at least a 70% probability of securing a total victory. The absolute strongest race on Disboard was the Old Deus. In the original series, only the god of war, Artosh, had made a prominent appearance, and even that powerhouse had ultimately been out-schemed and brought down by the Ex Machina. However, in this current reality, Artosh hadn't perished. Cedo and Sora could distinctly perceive the powerful divine fluctuations of several living deities radiating from the planet below. A 70% probability? Tet chuckled. That's already an incredibly high estimate. Seeing his playfully irreverent demeanor, Cedo suddenly directed a piercing query straight at him. By the way, where exactly is the Suniaster of this planet? The moment those words left Cedo's mouth, the cheerful grin completely froze on Tet's face, instantly replacing itself with a chilling coldness. How on earth do you know about the Suniaster? Tet's expression turned incredibly solemn. Knowledge regarding the Suniaster was a cosmic secret tightly guarded within Disboard, known only to a selective handful of ancient entities. Yet, Cedo, an external deity who had only recently stepped into the domain of the gods, was somehow fully aware of its existence. This revelation sent a wave of profound shock straight through Tet's core. Why so tense? Cedo's lips curled into a faint smirk. An artifact like the Suniaster, capable of manifesting any conceivable wish, certainly isn't a mere ordinary god-grade item. In fact, I have a strong feeling that it isn't an artifact native to your original realm either. Hearing Cedo's breakdown, Sora's interest was instantly piqued. Fascinating. A chalice that can grant any absolute wish? Sora grinned, a sharp glint in his eyes as he proposed, how about we up the ante a bit? The underlying implication of his words was glaringly obvious. Sora wanted to drag the legendary Suniaster directly onto the gambling table as a formal stake. Hearing this, Tet fell into a deep, heavy silence. Now that information regarding the Suniaster had completely leaked, attempting to conceal it any further was entirely futile. However, what exactly can you offer me in return? Tet countered, throwing the question right back at them. He could certainly produce the Suniaster. But what could Cedo and Sora possibly offer that held an equivalent cosmic value? Divine artifacts? I'm afraid a deity of his caliber truly had absolutely no practical need for standard god-grade gear. Reflecting on their current inventory, it seemed Cedo and Sora truly didn't possess many readily available assets that could match the sheer weight of a reality-warping chalice. How about the equipment set currently bound to my soul? Cedo spoke smoothly. Swish, swish. The moment his words fell, the spatial dragon blade and the dimensional magic cube materialized out of thin air, hovering majestically right behind his back as a cohesive unit. Tet looked on, a hint of perplexity crossing his features. While a synchronized set of divine artifacts was undeniably rare, to an entity of his standing, it still shouldn't have been considered an entirely irreplaceable treasure. Cedo didn't waste any time on empty explanations. With a casual flick of his wrist, he projected the item interface of his specialized spatial set directly before Tet's eyes, allowing him to inspect its attributes firsthand. The exact instant his gaze locked onto the unique trait labeled spatial deprivation, Ted froze completely dead in his tracks. This is... Ted stared blankly, entirely unable to believe the staggering reality of the text displayed before him. An equipment set capable of systematically stripping away an opponent's divine energy. To think that an artifact set possessing such an utterly broken, reality-defying trait was actively resting in Sito's hands. If this monstrous blade were to ever be turned against him. The mere thought sent an involuntary shiver coursing down Ted's spine. He finally understood exactly why Sito had marched straight over to pick a fight with him yesterday. So this was his hidden trump card. Furthermore, if Ted himself could somehow acquire this exact spatial set, he would undoubtedly go out of his way to hunt down every other deity in existence. After all, this was hands down the absolute fastest, most efficient shortcut to ascending straight into the exalted realm of a god king. Deal, Ted agreed after a long, calculated silence. With a sweeping motion of his arm, he manifested a mystical chalice radiating a dense, suffocating aura of absolute divinity. The Suniaster, God King artifact? Effect, tainted with a trace of absolute, ineffable cosmic power. Capable of manifesting any reality-warping wish, provided the scope of the desire does not exceed the structural quality of the artifact itself. Ascension requirement? Value? Scanning the bizarre attributes of the legendary chalice, a look of profound intrigue crossed the faces of both Sito and Sora simultaneously. It's not classified as a standard Master Divine artifact? Furthermore, what on earth is up with the barrage of hidden question marks in the description? Inspecting the fundamental mechanics of the Suniaster's reality warping effect, the duo came to a swift realization. This artifact had undoubtedly been kissed by a fraction of the primordial creation energy belonging to a Genesis-level creator deity. Otherwise, it could never possibly wield such an absurdly potent capability. Can this artifact directly assist you in breaking through to the God King realm? Sito asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. If it truly possessed the boundless capability to grant any absolute wish, then Tet should have logically utilized the Suniaster to elevate his own divine sequence to the God King level ages ago. I have never managed to obtain its true recognition, Tet admitted, shaking his head with a touch of melancholy. Granted, in the original timeline of the Great Ancient War, Tet had managed to catch the chalice into his hands right after Riku's tragic demise, utilizing its latent power to rewrite the absolute laws of the entire planet. But as for whether he had ever truly bound the artifact and gained its absolute allegiance, only Tet himself knew the real answer. In this integrated world, certain foundational aspects mirrored the records perfectly, while other elements had shifted dramatically. As for why Tet could safely handle the Suniaster now? The answer was incredibly straightforward, because he was a true, ascended deity. In the grand ecosystem of the god domain, a mere mortal would instantly disintegrate down to the molecular level upon coming into direct contact with a dense concentration of divine energy, let alone trying to physically grasp a weapon belonging to the God King tier. A god handling a divine relic was entirely natural, but for a mortal, it was absolute suicide. As Sito closely inspected the contours of the mystical chalice, his eyes suddenly narrowed as he noticed a tiny, distinct fracture running along one of its edges. In an instant, his mind flashed back to a specific reward he had secured during the conclusion of the second server-wide event, the mysterious chalice shard. If my suspicions are correct, that mysterious fragment resting in my storage might very well be a missing piece of this exact Suniaster. Thank you for reading. Chapter 302, Chapter 301, Disboard 16th Race, Humanity, Eliminated. 1801 words. Chapter 301, Disboard 16th Race, Humanity, Eliminated. With those thoughts swirling in his mind, Sito casually retrieved the mysterious chalice fragment from his spatial storage. Oh? Seeing the crystalline shard materialized in Sito's palm, Sora's eyes instantly sharpened as he directed his gaze toward the glaringly fractured edge of the Suniaster. The contours matched flawlessly. This piece was, without a shadow of a doubt, a missing fragment of the supreme Suniaster itself. This is... Ted's breath caught in his throat, a look of profound astonishment washing over his facial features. Hadn't the severed fragments of the Suniaster been lost to the void of the cosmic currents ages ago during the chaotic aftermath of the ancient Great War? How on earth did one of them end up squarely in Sito's possession? Let us wait until the conclusion of this entire war game to settle the details, Sito offered a confident smile, closing his hand to conceal the shard once more. As for this particular match, it's already mine. He he he. Tet merely let out a soft chuckle, offering no immediate rebuttal. The three transcendent entities shifted their focus back downward, locking their divine sight onto the surface of the gaming planet below. Meanwhile, down on Disboard, while Sito and his companions were conversing in the void, the disciplined forces of the Snezhnaya Empire had already established absolute structural control over the entirety of the Elkian kingdom. Throughout the systematic deployment, a few desperate pockets of localized resistance had naturally attempted to rebel against the occupying forces. However, they were all instantly and ruthlessly executed on the spot by the Empire's elite, battle-hardened soldiers. Shifting the perspective directly back to the interior of the Grand Elkian Royal Palace. Under the absolute vanguard leadership of Shiro, the Fatui, imperial military strategists, and top-tier guild executives had successfully marched into the royal throne room, completely securing the perimeter. "Why you? Who exactly are all of you?" A young, petite maiden with striking crimson hair and inherently sweet features stammered out in utter terror as her wide eyes locked onto Shiro's advancing entourage. This distraught maiden was none other than Stephanie Dola, the granddaughter of the late, former king of Elkia. "Detain her," Shiro commanded, her tone entirely devoid of emotion. Swish, swish, swish. Several high-ranking female guild executives instantly blurred forward, effortlessly pinning Stephanie's arms behind her back before she could even think of escaping. The sudden physical restraint left the young noblewoman thoroughly traumatized, her lips trembling as she failed to form coherent words. Shiro paid her absolutely no mind. With an aura of absolute authority, she calmly walked up the stone dais and seated herself upon the grand throne of Elkia. The exact moment her form settled into the seat, a brilliant, golden crown materialized out of thin air, cascading downward to rest perfectly upon the crown of Shiro's head. Simultaneously, the booming, celestial voice of Tet resonated throughout the absolute firmament of the entire world, echoing into the ears of every living soul across Disboard. Humanity has been defeated. The 16th race of Disboard has been officially eliminated. All structural assets, territories, and resources belonging to the human realm are now the sovereign property of the Snezhnaya Empire. The moment the divine decree reverberated across the continents, the entire world fell into a state of absolute, collective shock. What in the world? Humanity was driven out of the game that quickly? Humph, as expected of those fragile, pathetic monkeys who have merely been lingering on the brink of extinction. To think they would be wiped out the absolute instant the war commenced. Still, I wonder exactly how powerful these invaders from the alternate reality truly are. I'll go out and test their mettle myself. Across the various territories of Disboard, the remaining sentient races of the Exceed began to loudly voice their thoughts. In reality, none of the higher-tier races were particularly shocked by the lightning-fast annihilation of the human kingdom. After all, humanity had universally been deemed the absolute weakest, most pathetic race in existence. Returning to the grand throne room of Elkia. Perched regally upon the royal throne, Shiro's gaze remained completely expressionless as she swept her eyes across the assembled ranks, her soft, delicate voice cutting through the silence. "Have those two been apprehended yet?" "They have been successfully secured," Lady Shiro, old 28 stepped forward to report, before casually executing a sharp hand gesture toward the rear entrance. A moment later, a few powerhouse female executives marched into the throne room, firmly escorting two captive young maidens forward. Among the two new prisoners, one was a striking young girl with vibrant purple hair and skin as pristine and flawless as fine jade. Her delicate facial features seemed as though they had been meticulously sketched by a master artist. She wore the traditional embroidered white robes of a nomadic maiden, her elegant tresses woven into intricate, slender braids that beautifully framed the cascade of her flowing hair. This individual was none other than Clammy Zell, one of the primary, most influential contenders for the vacant throne of Elkia. The maiden standing right beside her was equally breathtaking. However, her distinct, elongated ears made it glaringly obvious that she belonged to the fifth-ranked race of the Exceed, the Elves. She was none other than Fiel Nervalin, Clammy's closest companion and, unbeknownst to many, the hidden trump card covertly planted within the human realm by the Elven hierarchy. What exactly do you invaders from the alternate world want with us? Unlike the thoroughly traumatized Stephanie, Clammy possessed an incredibly fierce, fiery temperament. She was a maiden who dedicated her entire heart and soul to the survival of humanity. Now that her entire nation had been occupied overnight, her core was completely consumed by a wave of righteous fury. What do we want? Haruno Yukino Shida suddenly spoke up, a playful, incredibly mischievous smile spreading across her lips as she teased, why, to wage a total war, of course. This is a grand war game orchestrated between supreme deities. Since you have been cast as mere pawns on the board, you should try to maintain the proper dignity and self-awareness expected of a pawn. Clammy's fists clenched tightly, her heart swelling with an intense sense of suffocating grievance. While her intellect allowed her to conceptually understand that this entire conflict was merely a playground for the gods, physically witnessing her entire homeland being systematically dominated was a bitter pill that she simply couldn't stomach. Clammy, please don't burn yourself out with anger, Fiel chimed in from the side, her demeanor carrying a characteristically airhead, naturally ditz character. Even though Fiel was Clammy's most loyal friend, she herself was completely oblivious to the fact that she was a strategic chess piece engineered by the Elven leadership. After all, the Elven High Command had thoroughly sealed away all of her relevant memories regarding her true mission. Take them down to the dungeons for now. Have the elite guards keep a constant, unwavering eye on them, Shiro commanded with a dismissive wave of her small hand. None of these mortal captives possessed the tactical weight required to sway the final outcome of this divine war. Receiving their orders, the female executives turned on their heels, systematically escorting the captive trio of Stephanie, Clammy, and Fiel out of the throne room. Roar! Monkeys of the lower realm! Get the hell out here and face your demise! Suddenly, a thunderous, sky-shattering roar cascaded down from the heavens, vibrating violently through the atmosphere and causing the Fatui harbingers inside the palace to instinctively expand their sensory arrays to inspect the perimeter outside. Through their perception, they quickly discovered that an enormous, pitch-black western dragon, a powerhouse belonging to the fourth-ranked race of the Exceed, the Dragonia, was currently hovering majestically right above the airspace of the capital city, roaring down at the palace with absolute arrogance. Well, isn't this amusing? Karukiru Amo let out a sharp, feral grin. A mere mortal creature actually possessed the sheer, unadulterated audacity to refer to an army backed by true gods as monkeys? She truly had no idea where this overgrown lizard had managed to gather such a delusional amount of self-confidence. Turning her body, Karukiru Amo's gaze swept past the elite members of the Supreme Five Swords before ultimately locking onto Tsukuyo Inaba. Tsukuyo, go out there and obliterate that thing in a single strike. Understood. The white-haired, twin-tailed Tsukuyo Inaba offered a calm, concise nod. Keeping her eyes completely closed in her trademark serene fashion, she smoothly pivoted around and began walking toward the palace exit, her fingers resting lightly on the hilt of her blade. Meanwhile, outside the Grand Palace gates, having just been escorted into the courtyard, Stephanie, Clammy, and Fiel looked up at the looming silhouette of the massive black dragon, their faces instantly draining of all color. After all, they were looking at a living catastrophe belonging to the fourth-ranked Dragonia race. We're doomed. Even the Dragonia have descended upon us. Curse it all. Clammy, please don't be angry. The three captive maidens spoke in a frantic, disorganized panic. The terrifying appearance of the black dragon wasn't just witnessed by the cowering human citizens within Elkia. Even the neighboring borders of the Eastern Federation, the sovereign realm of the war beasts, were currently utilizing their high-tech sensory equipment to observe the chaotic developments unfolding within the Elkian capital. Furthermore, deep within the Grand Library of Elkia's capital city, a stunningly voluptuous, sweet-faced young maiden possessing a pair of majestic, feathered wings extending elegantly from her waistline slowly walked out onto the balcony. This alluring entity was none other than the Flugel maiden, Jibril. Oh my, this is turning out to be incredibly fascinating. To think these outsiders from the alternate reality actually wield such extraordinary, supernatural capabilities. Jibril murmured, resting her chin in her hand as a gleam of profound intrigue flashed across her eyes. I wonder if they actually possess the capacity to slaughter a powerhouse of the fourth-ranked Dragonia. Ah, this is simply too entertaining. Jibril giggled softly to herself, thoroughly settling into her role as a detached spectator enjoying a grand theatrical performance. It was precisely at that hypertense moment. From the primary exit of the royal palace, a diminutive, white-haired L***ly sporting twintails calmly stepped out into the open courtyard, cradling a single-sheathed katana tightly against her chest. The exact instant her tiny figure materialized, the collective gaze of every single observer monitoring the battlefield instantly converged upon her form. Ho? They actually sent out such a microscopic little monkey? You aren't even large enough to get stuck between my teeth. Looking down at Tsukuyo Inaba from the clouds, the massive black dragon let out a thunderous, incredibly mocking burst of laughter. Thank you for reading. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Novels Wonderland.